We were sitting in the first row of the plane, and do you remember the guy was a young black man, sort of ran onto the plane. He was wearing a yellow vest. He was a worker working the bridge or something. And he came up to you and he said, I'm not supposed to be on the plane right now. I'm not supposed to say anything, but you helped me turn my life around. I got this job because of you. And what I remember more than anything else is he had this huge smile on his face. But it wasn't because you told him to go out there and be happy. It was because you told him to go out there and fix some stuff. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about right now.
Those experiences are so life-sustaining. It's so remarkable to have that happen, and that's something I've been immensely privileged to constantly experience, although there's also something about it that's extremely painful. You know, the magnitude of that joy is sort of proportional to the obstacles it had to overcome while it was attempting to manifest itself. You know, and one of the things I'm sure you saw on the tour, and I don't know how this affected you, was the depth of hunger for encouragement that exists everywhere, as far as I can tell. And everyone wants to be appreciated when they bring their best to the table. That's why the current assault on merit is so unbelievably brutal, because it will deny everyone the right to be appreciated for being their best. And you might ask, well, when does the best become your enemy? And that's easy. It's when you flee from it. In order to have any positive meaning in your life, you have to have identified a goal, and you have to be working towards it. And there is a technical reason for that. And the technical reason, as far as I can tell, is that the circuitry that produces the kind of positive emotion that people really like is only activated when you notice that when you're proceeding towards a goal that you value. And so that means that if you don't have a goal that you value, you can't have any positive emotion. So technically that's the incentive reward system, and the underlying circuitry is dopaminergic, and when that circuitry is activated, then it's part of the exploratory circuit. It gives you the sense of being actively engaged in something worthwhile. You tend to think of positive emotion as something produced by reward, but there's two kinds of positive emotion. One is the reward that's associated with satiation, and that's consummatory reward, and that's the reward you get when you're hungry and you eat. But the thing about eating when you're hungry is that it destroys the framework within which you were operating, right? It's time to eat. Well, you eat, and then that framework's no longer relevant, so the consummatory reward eliminates the value framework, and then you're stuck with, well, what are you going to do next? And so the consummatory reward has with it its own problems, but the incentive reward is constantly what keeps you moving forward. And incentive reward, because it's dopaminergic, also is analgesic, literally analgesic. So if you're in pain, you take opiates, and that will cut the pain, but so will psychomotor stimulants like cocaine or amphetamines. And so it's literally the case that if you're engaged in something that's engaging and you're working towards a goal, that you're going to feel less pain. And you can see this happening with athletes who, you know, they'll break their thumb or something, or maybe sometimes even their ankle, and they'll keep playing the game. Of course, afterwards they're suffering like mad, but the fact that they're so filled with goal-directed enthusiasm means that, well, the pain systems are in some sense shut off. So that's an interesting thing, because what it suggests, I mean, then you could imagine, I might say, well, how happy are you that you've made a certain amount of progress? And if you think about it, what you'd say is, well, it depends on how much progress and in relationship to what. So hypothetically, you're going to be happier if you've made quite a bit of progress towards a really important goal. And then you have to think through what it means for a goal to be really important, because that's not obvious. Now, you could say, you're in this class and you're listening to some information, and maybe there's two reasons for that. You might find the information interesting per se, but let's forget about that for a minute. You need to listen to the information so that you can do well on the assignments, so that you can do well in the class. You need to do well in your classes so that you can finish up your degree. You need to finish up your degree so that you can find your place in the world. You need to do that so that you're financially stable, and maybe you can start a family and have a life, and that's all part of being a good person, something like that. And so that's a hierarchy of goals, and you might say that being a good person would be the thing, however vaguely thought through, that's at the top of that hierarchy. And then when you're doing things that serve that ultimate purpose, then you're going to find those more meaningful, and that meaning is actually produced as a consequence of the engagement of this exploratory circuit. that's nested right down in your hypothalamus. It's really, really old. It's as old as thirst, and it's as old as hunger. It's really an old system. And so you want to have that thing activated. So as men move into their careers, how might responsibility and purpose be conceptualized? Well, look, so I always start from the fundamental observation that life is characterized by a fair bit of suffering. There's a tragic element to life. Tragedy tainted by malevolence. And what that poses a problem, and the problem is, well, what can sustain you through suffering and tragedy, betrayal and illness, death, loss, disappointment, frustration, confusion. And it's not hedonism. It's not happiness, not if you conceptualize happiness in this narrowly pleasure-seeking hedonic way. First of all, that doesn't iterate very well. You know, you can drink 26 of vodka one night, and that might be a pretty fun night, but you know the next 2 or 3 days are not going to be so pleasant, and you'll probably do at least 5 things that you seriously regret, assuming you can remember what they are. So it's not a great strategy, and everyone knows that you know, that casual, impulsive pleasure-seeking is not, it's not a good game. Everyone knows that. And that doesn't mean you should be afraid to try it, right? That's entirely different. You need to bash yourself around a bit. What did William Blake say? Wisdom through excess. There's definitely something to that. So, you know, walling yourself away from experimentation, that's not a good idea. But falling prey to indulgences, that's a catastrophe. So you can't find, and then if your life is proceeding in a direction that's painful and tragic for reasons that might be really out of your control, obviously you're not going to be happy during those times. You may not have even the opportunity to seek anything that's pleasurable or the ability to experience it. So then what's going to sustain you under those circumstances and sustain your will to live, but even more importantly, protect you from the resentment and the moral corruption that unrequited suffering can so easily produce? And the answer to that is not happiness, but something like meaning. And then you might ask yourself, well, where is meaning to be found? And the answer seems to be primarily through the voluntary adoption of responsibility. You know, so people find meaning in the love they have for their partner and their decision to care for someone else as well or better than they would care for themselves. They find meaning in that, and it can sustain itself across many, many decades, for better or for worse. That's no joke, that phrase. They find meaning in the relationship they establish with their children, assuming they take the responsibility for that relationship. They find meaning in their friendships. They find meaning in their business associations, their civic engagement. You know, people moralize at, older people moralize at younger people and say, well, you should accept your responsibility, you should shoulder your duty. And that's true, but it isn't exactly that you should do it because you should do it, even though you should. It's that there isn't anything better that you can possibly do. Like, you have to justify yourself to yourself. You have to justify yourself to yourself because of your inadequacies and your failure and your error and your propensity to repeat errors that you know you shouldn't repeat, your sinful nature. You have to atone for that. And then you have to justify your life to yourself because it's characterized by death and suffering. And so you need something worthwhile to do. And, well, then you might say, well, there's nothing worthwhile to do. It's well, you're probably not really in any position to make that judgment, you know, till you've gone all in at least one thing. At least one thing. Because, like, who the hell are you? You're 16, you're cynical and nihilistic. It's like, you're not wise. You're not a philosopher. You don't know anything. And thank God, right? Because you don't even want to think you know anything because you're bloody miserable and you're suffering. And so if you're also right, well, then you're doomed. So you better bloody well pray that your cynicism and nihilism, unearned though it may be, is based on a fundamental falsehood. And it is. You can find deep significance in your life, and you find it essentially through the voluntary the decision to voluntarily bear your suffering and to trudge uphill nonetheless. And there's something heroic about that in the most fundamental sense. And that heroism is something so deeply meaningful that it, in some sense, triumphs over even death. And so, as you move forward through life, you mature, you start by developing responsibility for yourself, your friends, your roommates, then you take on a partner, and you have a family, and you expand the domain of responsibility and generosity, and you want to expand that. Who knows how much you can expand that? You know, you could be a credit to the nation. Well, there's an aim. Why don't you aim to be like credit to the nation by the time you're 50? Because what, you got something better to do than that? And the answer to that's no. And, you know, what are you going to do? You're going to pursue endless one-night stands. You're going to bury yourself nose deep in cocaine. You're going to become an alcoholic. You're going to pursue that tinsely, trashy hedonism that is nothing but destructive and generates nothing but self-contempt, and then bitterness, then misery, then vengefulness. It's like, that's why do that? I mean, it's easier in some sense, right? Although it's not, because it's rife with catastrophe and suffering. So it's way better to take on, to envision yourself as, that's the cross image fundamentally, right? The pathway to redemption is to bear your cross up the hill voluntarily. It's a hell of a thing to ask, right? Because you have to accept the fundamental limits of your mortal vulnerability. And you have to say to yourself, I will do good nonetheless. Right? And that's not obedience. That's not naivete. That's a cold decision, man. So everyone great makes that decision. So make that decision, because maybe you're great.
So you're at a particular stage right now, and that stage would involve a particular worldview and the behaviors that go along with that. So the perceptions and behaviors. But it's not enough, because you haven't mastered the whole world and you're making mistakes all the time. And then there's other neurological mechanisms that, so maybe that's a more left hemisphere phenomenon, the instantiation of that identity. Then there's right hemisphere mechanisms that are tracking your errors and sort of and keeping track of them. And the errors are an indication that your theory is incomplete. So the errors accumulate, and the information around the errors accumulate, and another identity starts to become formulated, and it solves all the problems your previous identity did, but also some additional ones. When you have an aha moment like that, it's the manifestation of that next identity that's making itself known. It's you know, because it's being built from the bottom up. It isn't explicit yet. And then you'll encounter an explicit statement. You mentioned a couple there, and they map onto that. And that's the aha. It's like, oh yes, that's what ties together these things that I've been wrestling with in the back of my mind.
Every time you learn something, you learn because something you did didn't work. And that exposes you to the part of the world that you don't understand. Every time you're exposed to a part of the world that you don't understand, you have the possibility of rebuilding the structures that you use to interpret the world. That's often why it's more important to notice that you're wrong than it is to prove that you're right. One of the things that you're supposed to learn in university is precisely that. It might be useful to listen to people that annoy you on the off chance that they know something that, if they tell you, you can use instead of dying. Talking to people who agree with what you say is like walking around in a desert. You already know everything that they say. The reason you're associating with them in that situation is so that they never say anything that challenges you, because you're afraid that if you go outside of what you understand, that you won't be able to tolerate the chaos. But it isn't the case. People have an unbelievable capacity to face and overcome things they don't understand. And not only that, that's essentially what gives life its meaning. The Buddhists say life is suffering. And you think, well, if that's the case, why bother with it? And people do ask that question, and they ask it in ways that result in their own destruction, and worse, in the destruction of others. So, for example, people who become particularly cruel, particularly in a genocidal manner, are more than willing to dispense with as many human beings as they can possibly train their sights on, because they're so disgusted by the nature of human limitation that they'd rather eradicate it. And lots of people become suicidal because they can't bear the conditions of their own existence. And suffering is real, and it's inescapable. So the question is, what do you do about it? Idea in Jungian psychology called the circumambulation. And Jung had this idea that you had a potential future self, which would be in potential everything that you could be, and that it manifests itself moment to moment in your present life by making you interested in things. And the things that you're interested in are the things that would guide you along the path that would lead you to maximal development. Now, it sounds like a metaphysical idea or a mystical idea even, but it's not. It's not. It's a really profoundly biological idea. The idea is something like, well, you're set up so that you're automatically interested in those things that would fully expand you as a well-adapted creature. Well, like, there's nothing radical about that idea. What else could possibly be the case? Unless there's something fundamentally flawed about you, that is what the situation would be. It's kind of interesting to think about how that would be manifest moment to moment, but the idea is something like, well, your interest is captured by those things that lead you down the path of development. Well, that better be the case. Okay, so that's fine. And so there's some utility in pursuing those things that you're interested in. That's the call to adventure, let's say. So, and the call to adventure takes you all sorts of places. Now, the problem with the call to adventure is, like, what the hell do you know? You might be interested in things that are kind of warped and bent. And often it's the case that when new parts of people manifest themselves and grip their interests, say, they do it very badly and shoddily. And so you stumble around like an idiot when you try to do something new. That's why the fool is the precursor to the savior from the symbolic perspectives, because you have to be a fool before you can be a master. And if you're not willing to be a fool, then you can't be a master. So you're gonna, it's an error-ridden process. And that's also laid out in the Old Testament stories, because the first thing that happens to all these patriarchal figures when God kicks them out of their father's house when they're like 84 is that they run into all sorts of trouble, and some of it's social and some of it's natural and some of it's a consequence of their own moral inadequacy. So they're fools. But the thing that's so interesting is that despite the fact that they're fools, they're still supposed to go on the adventure, and that they're capable of learning enough as a consequence of moving forward on the adventure so that they straighten themselves out across time. And so it's something like this. So this circumambulation that Jung talked about was this continual, we'll return to this continual circling in some sense of who you could be. You might notice, for example, that there are themes in your life. You know, when you go back across your experiences, you see you kind of have your typical experience that sort of repeats itself. And there might be variation on it, like a musical theme, but it's like you're circling yourself and getting closer to yourself as you move across time. Imagine that something glimmers before you. It's an interest that's dawning, and you decide, well, first of all, you're paralyzed. You think, well, how do I know if I should pursue that? It's probably a stupid idea. And the proper response to that is, you're right, it probably is a stupid idea, because almost all ideas are stupid. And so the probability that as you move forward on your adventure that you're going to get it right the first time is zero. It's just not going to happen. And so then you might think, well, maybe I'll just wait around until I get the right idea, and which people do, right? So they're like 40-year-old, 13-year-olds, which is not a good idea. And so they wait around until it's waiting for Godot, until they finally got it right. But the problem is you're too stupid to know when you've got it right. So waiting around isn't going to help, because even if the perfect opportunity manifested itself to you in your incomplete form, the probability that you would recognize it as the perfect opportunity is zero. You might even think it's the worst possible idea that you've ever heard of anywhere. Highly likely, highly likely. So you have, there's, Nietzsche called that a will to stupidity, which I really liked. So, because he thought of stupidity as being, you know, you have to take it into account fundamentally and work with it. And so you can take these tentative steps on your pathway to destiny, and you can assume that you're going to do it badly. And that's really useful, because You don't have to beat yourself up. It's pretty easy to do it badly. But the thing is, it's way better to do it badly than not to do it at all. When I talk to people about doing the future authoring program, they often put it off. And it's not surprising because it's hard. But it's more than that. They think, well, I don't know how to write. I'm going to do a bad job. I don't really like assignments. I'm going to have to do it perfectly. I need to wait till I have enough time. And like one of those is enough to stop you cold, and all 5 of them, you're just done. And so I tell people, do it haphazardly, a tiny bit at a time, and badly. Because you can do that. I tell my students when they're doing their thesis, master's thesis, write a really bad first draft. And then we have a little conversation about that because they don't think I mean that. Because it sounds like a cliche in some sense. It's not a cliche. It's not a cliche at all. It means you're a terrible writer, but if someone put a gun to your head and said, you have to have your 100-page thesis done by next Monday, or I'll shoot you, but I don't care how terrible it is, you would sit down and write it. And the thing is, then you have it, right? Then you have something, and then you can fix it. You can iterate and fix it. That bad first draft, that's the most valuable thing, and so that's what you need. You need a bad first draft of yourself. And there's an idea that Jung developed about the trickster and the jester, the comedian, right? That the trickster is the precursor to the savior. That's one of the things I learned from Jung that was just, it's so unlikely. You'd never think that. It's so amazing that that might be the case. But the satirical and the ironic and the troublemaker, the comedian, the fool is the precursor to the savior. Why? Because you're a fool when you start something new. And so if you're not willing to be a fool, then you'll never start anything new. And if you never start anything new, then you won't develop. And so the willingness to be a fool is the precursor to transformation. And that's the same as humility. And so if you're going to write your destiny, you can do a bad first job. You're going to get smarter as you move forward. That's the thing, is that so something beckons to you. That's what happens here. Maybe the star that Geppetto wished on was the wrong damn star, but at least it was a star, right? At least it was in the sky. At least it moved him forward. And so you say in your life, well, something grips you and fills you with interest. And you think, well, should I do that? And the answer is, if not that, then something. What if it's a mistake? It's a mistake. Rest assured. What do you know? You're going to stumble around, right? And what's going to happen is this. You're going to not stay in stasis. You're not going to wander around in circles. And I see people like that. They said, well, I never knew what to do, and now I'm 40. It's like, that's not so good. That's not so good. And you might say, well, and there is a literature, too, that suggests that people are a lot more unhappy when they look back on their lives about the things they didn't do than they are about the mistakes they made while they were doing things. And so that's really worth thinking about, too, because there's redemptive mistakes. And a redemptive mistake would be a mistake that you make when you go out and try to do something. You know, you think, okay, I'm going to try to do this. When you're not good at it, you make a bunch of mistakes. It's like, what's the consequence if you pay attention? Is you're not quite so stupid anymore. That's the thing, is you've been informed by the results of your errors. And so what happens is you follow the beacon, you follow the light. And you're blind, so you don't know where the light is. It's dimly apprehended only, and you're afraid to follow it. But you decide to take some stumbling steps towards it. And as you take stumbling steps towards it, you become illuminated and enlightened and informed because of the nature of your experience, because you're pushing yourself beyond where you are, and you're going into the country that you have not yet been in, and you learn something. And so what happens then is the star moves. You move 10 feet towards it, and you think, no, that's not right. I didn't get it right. It isn't there. It's actually there. And so then you see it somewhere else, and you shift yourself slightly, and you move forward. And that's what happens, is that you continue as you change. The thing that guides you forward moves, right? It's like God in the desert in Egypt, the pillar of light that you're following. It's moving. It's not a permanent thing. You move towards it, it moves away, it guides you forward. And so you say, well, is what I'm aiming at paradise itself? And the answer to that is no, because what do you know? You couldn't see paradise if it was right in front of you, but you might get a glimmer of it. And so you move towards it, and you grow. And then the next time you open your eyes, you see a little bit more clearly. And that's what happens, is that just happens over and over, right? It keeps moving. And so you move like this. But the thing that's so cool is that all those zigs and zags, you say, and each of those zags and zigs is a catastrophe. I hit a wall, my God, and then I had to die a little bit, and I barely got back up. It's a phoenix transformation at each turn, and it's painful. But the thing is that even though you've traveled 20 miles, let's say, on that road, and you've only moved 3 miles forward, you've moved 3 miles forward instead of falling backwards, because that's the thing too, is that if you stand still, you fall backwards. You cannot stand still, because the world moves away from you if you stand still. And there's no stasis, there's only backwards. And so if you're not moving forwards, then you're moving backwards. And that's more of the underlying truth of the Matthew principle. To those who have everything, more will be given. From those who have nothing, everything will be taken. It's a warning. Do not stay in one place. Well, as you zig and zag, maybe the cataclysm of each transformation starts to lessen. There's not so much of you that has to die with every mistake. And maybe you end up oriented at least reasonably properly. And if you were sensible, that would have been your trip. But it wasn't, right? It's that. And perhaps it's a lot worse than that. Perhaps there's no shortage of backtracking. But it doesn't matter, because as you stumble forward, you illuminate and inform yourself. And perhaps that's partly because the world is made of information. And if you encounter it and tangle with it, then it informs you. And then you become informed. And then you're information. And then you're ready. Idea in Jungian psychology called the circumambulation. And Jung had this idea that you had a potential future self, which would be in potential everything that you could be, and that it manifests itself moment to moment in your present life by making you interested in things. And the things that you're interested in are the things that would guide you along the path that would lead you to maximal development. Now, it sounds like a metaphysical idea or a mystical idea even, but it's not. It's not. It's a really profoundly biological idea. The idea is something like, well, you're set up so that you're automatically interested in those things that would fully expand you as a well-adapted creature. Well, like, there's nothing radical about that idea. What else could possibly be the case? Unless there's something fundamentally flawed about you, that is what the situation would be. It's kind of interesting to think about how that would be manifest moment to moment, but the idea is something like, well, your interest is captured by those things that lead you down the path of development. Well, that better be the case. Okay, so that's fine. And so there's some utility in pursuing those things that you're interested in. That's the call to adventure, let's say. So, and the call to adventure takes you all sorts of places. Now, the problem with the call to adventure is, like, what the hell do you know? You might be interested in things that are kind of warped and bent. And often it's the case that when new parts of people manifest themselves and grip their interests, say, they do it very badly and shoddily. And so you stumble around like an idiot when you try to do something new. That's why the fool is the precursor to the savior from the symbolic perspectives. Because you have to be a fool before you can be a master. And if you're not willing to be a fool, then you can't be a master. So you're going to, it's an error-ridden process. And that's also laid out in the Old Testament stories, because the first thing that happens to all these patriarchal figures when God kicks them out of their father's house when they're like 84 is that they run into all sorts of trouble, and some of it's social and some of it's natural and some of it's a consequence of their own moral inadequacy. So they're fools. But the thing that's so interesting is that despite the fact that they're fools, they're still supposed to go on the adventure, and that they're capable of learning enough as a consequence of moving forward on the adventure so that they straighten themselves out across time. And so it's something like this. So this circumambulation that Jung talked about was this continual, we'll return to this continual circling in some sense of who you could be. You might notice, for example, that there are themes in your life. You know, when you go back across your experiences, you see you kind of have your typical experience that sort of repeats itself. And there might be variation on it, like a musical theme, but it's like you're circling yourself and getting closer to yourself as you move across time. So imagine that something glimmers before you. It's an interest that's dawning, and you decide, well, first of all, you're paralyzed. You think, well, how do I know if I should pursue that? It's probably a stupid idea. And the proper response to that is, you're right, it probably is a stupid idea, because almost all ideas are stupid. And so the probability that as you move forward on your adventure that you're going to get it right the first time is zero. It's just not going to happen. And so then you might think, well, maybe I'll just wait around until I get the right idea, and which people do, right? So they're like 40-year-old, 13-year-olds, which is not a good idea. And so they wait around until it's waiting for Godot, until they finally got it right. But the problem is you're too stupid to know when you've got it right. So waiting around isn't going to help, because even if the perfect opportunity manifested itself to you in your incomplete form, the probability that you would recognize it as the perfect opportunity is zero. You might even think it's the worst possible idea that you've ever heard of anywhere. Highly likely, highly likely. So you have, Nietzsche called that a will to stupidity, which I really liked. So, because he thought of stupidity as being, you know, you have to take it into account fundamentally and work with it. And so you can take these tentative steps on your pathway to destiny, and you can assume that you're going to do it badly. And that's really useful, because you don't have to beat yourself up. It's pretty easy to do it badly. But the thing is, it's way better to do it badly than not to do it at all. Let's say you want to become who you could be in the fullest sense. So let's say you're someone who's going to solve some serious problems. Okay, the first thing you have to do is admit to the seriousness of the problems. That's no joke. And so the first thing is just the terror of the problem itself. And that's enough to paralyze you, right? And that's the Hydra, that's the Gorgon with the head of snakes. It'll paralyze you and turn you to stone. That's the basilisk in the Harry Potter series. Mm-hmm. You look at it and it turns you to stone and lurks underneath everything, right? And it's malevolence and tragedy. And so there's that. And then the next is, well, you're going to take responsibility for that? You're really going to do that, are you? That's a hell of a load, man. And so it's daunting to even consider that. And then there's the discipline and responsibility that necessitates, which is also daunting. It's like, oh my God, the problem's that serious. I'm really going to have to get my act together in order to not contribute to it, much less solve it. And so the problem is terrible. And then the solution is daunting. But the upside of that is like, well, there isn't anything better to have than a problem that's worth solving, like that's really worth solving, right? And so the more of that you take on, the more you have a reason to get out of bed in the morning, no matter what. Like, I'm getting up, I'm trudging forward. Doesn't matter what I'm suffering from. I've got things that need to be done. They're necessary. And that gives you that sense of purpose that is the antidote to bitterness. Okay, well, let's say you want your life to be meaningful. It's like, okay, then what you do matters. It actually matters. Or how starting to clean up the room changed their life. That's quite fun, because it's something I always tell people to do instead of going out and protesting. Jesus, I just can't stand that.
Cleaning up the room?
Yeah.
Meaning?
Well, my sense is that if you want to change the world, you start from yourself and work outward, because you build your competence that way. It's like, I don't know how you can go out and protest the structure of the entire economic system if you can't keep your room organized. Well, I made a video call, which was called Message to Millennials, where it was called How to Change the World Properly. A bit of it on the pretentious side, I suppose, but I was trying to produce something that was a counterposition to this idea that what you should do is go out and fix up other people. You know, that's just not right. And there's a New Testament line about that, something about, you know, not worrying too much about the log in your neighbor's eye, or about the speck in your neighbor's eye when you have a log in your eye. What would the world be like if people stopped avoiding the things they knew they should do? You know, because the question is, how much are we contributing to the fact that life is an existential catastrophe and a tragedy? How much is our own corruption contributing to that? That's a really worthwhile question. The things you leave undone because you're angry, you're resentful, you're lazy, you have inertia. Well, you consult your conscience and it says, well, you know, that place over there could use a little work. It's the same as working on yourself, and so you clean that up because you can, and then things are a little clearer around you, and you're a little better off because you've practiced a bit, and so you're a little stronger, and then something else manifests itself and says, well, maybe you could like take a crack at fixing me up too. So you decide to do that, and then that gets a little bit more pristine, you know, and soon, and it's humble because you're not exceeding your domain of competence. You know, it's like, don't be fixing up the economy, 18-year-olds. You don't know anything about the economy. It's a massive, complex machine beyond anyone's understanding, and you mess with it at your peril. So, and can you even clean up your own room? No. Well, you should think about that. You should think about that. What could you do to improve yourself? Well, let's step one step backwards. The first question might be, why should you even bother improving yourself? And I think the answer to that is something like, so you don't suffer any more stupidly than you have to. And maybe so others don't have to either. It's something like that. You know, like there's a real injunction at the bottom of it. It's not some casual self-help doctrine. It's that if you don't organize yourself properly, you'll pay for it, and in a big way, and so will the people around you. Now, and you could say, well, I don't care about that, but that's actually not true. You actually do care about that, because if you're in pain, you will care about it. And so you do care about it, even if it's just that negative way, you know. It's very rare that you can find someone who's in excruciating pain who would ever say, well, it would be no better if I was out of this. It's sort of, pain is one of those things that brings the idea that it would be better if it didn't exist along with it. It's incontrovertible. So you get your act together so that there isn't any more stupid pain around you than necessary. Well, so then the question might be, well, how would you go about getting your act together? And the answer to that, and this is a phenomenological idea too, it's something like, look around for something that bothers you and see if you can fix it. So now you think, well, let's say you go into you can do this in a room. It's quite fun to do it just when you're sitting in a room, like a room, maybe your bedroom. You can sit there and just sort of meditate on it and think, okay, if I wanted to spend 10 minutes making this room better, what would I have to do? And you have to ask yourself that, right? It's not a command, it's like a genuine question. And things will pop out in the room that you know, like there's a stack of papers over there that's kind of bugging you, and you know that maybe little order there would be a good thing, and you know you haven't, there's some rubbish behind your computer monitor that you haven't attended to for like 6 months, and the room would be slightly better if it was a little less dusty and the cables weren't all tangled up the same way. And like if you allow yourself just to consider the expanse in which you exist at that moment, there'll be all sorts of things that'll pop out in it that you could just fix. And you know, I might say, well, if you were coming to see me for psychotherapy, the easiest thing for us to do first would just be to get you to organize your room. You think, well, is that psychotherapy? And the answer is, well, it depends on how you conceive the limits of your being. And I would say, start where you can start. You know, if something announces itself to you, which is a strange way of thinking about it, as in need of repair, that you could repair, then, hey, fix it. You fix 100 things like that, your life will be a lot different. You know, I often tell people too, fix the things you repeat every day, because people tend to think of those as trivial, right? You get up, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you know, you have your routines that you go through every day. Well, those probably constitute 50% of your life. And people think, well, they're mundane, I don't need to pay attention to them. It's like, no, that's exactly wrong. The things you do every day, those are the most important things you do. Hands down. All you have to do is do the arithmetic. You figure it out right away. So 100 adjustments to your broader domain of being, and there's a lot less rubbish, and there's a lot less rubbish around, and a lot fewer traps for you to step into. And so that's in keeping with Jung's idea about erasing once you've got your mind and your emotions together, and once you're acting that out, then you can extend what you're willing to consider yourself and start fixing up the things that are part of your broader extent. Now, sometimes you don't know how to do that. So you might say, imagine you're walking down Bloor Street and there's this guy who's like alcoholic and schizophrenic and has been on the streets for 10 years. He sort of stumbles towards you and, you know, incoherently mutters something. That's a problem. And it would be good if you could fix it, but you haven't got a clue about how to fix that. You just walk around that and go find something that you could fix, because if you muck about in that, not only is it unlikely that you'll help that person, it's very likely that you'll get hurt yourself. So, you know, just because while you're experiencing things announce themselves as in need of repair doesn't mean that it's you right then and there that should repair them. You have to have some humility. You know, you don't walk up to a helicopter that isn't working and just start tinkering away with it. You have to stay within your domain of competence. But most of the time, if people look at their lives, you know, it's a very interesting thing to do. I like the idea of the room, because you can do that at the drop of a hat. You know, you go back to where you live and sit down and think, okay, I'm going to make this place better for half an hour. What should I do? And you have to ask, and things will just pop up like mad. And it's partly because your mind is a very strange thing. As soon as you give it a name, a genuine aim, it'll reconfigure the world in keeping with that aim. That's actually how you see to begin with. And so if you set it a task, especially, you have to be genuine about it, which is why you have to bring your thoughts and emotions together, and then you have to get them in your body so you're acting consistently. You have to be genuine about the aim, but once you aim, the world will reconfigure itself around that aim, which is very strange. And it's technically true. You know, the best example of that, you have all seen this video where you watch the basketballs being tossed back and forth between members of the white team versus the black team, and while you're doing that, a gorilla walks up into the middle of the video and you don't see it. It's like, you know, if you thought about that experiment for about 5 years, that would be about the right amount of time to spend thinking about it, because what it shows you is that you see what you aim at. And that, man, if you can get one thing through your head as a consequence of even being in university, that would be a good one. You see what you aim at. And so, because one inference you might draw from that is, be careful what you aim at, right? What you aim at determines the way the world manifests itself to you. And so if the world is manifesting itself in a very negative way, one thing to ask is, are you aiming at the right thing? Now, you know, I'm not trying to reduce everybody's problems to an improper aim. People get cut off at the knees for all sorts of reasons. You know, they get sick, they have accidents. There's a random element to being, that's for sure. And so you don't want to take anything, even that particular phrase, too far. You want to bind it with the fact that random things do happen to people, but it's still a great thing to ask. Here's some items, so you guys can do a quick big 5 on yourselves, and I'll tell you the upside and downside of it. So if you're orderly, you follow a schedule. How many of you follow a schedule? Okay. And how many of you don't? Okay, so one thing I would recommend is that you do. And I'll tell you why. Like, intelligence is a very good predictor of academic performance. And there's not a lot you can do about your intelligence. I mean, you can squander it, but it's very difficult to improve it. Conscientiousness, well, it's a trait too, so it's hard to work on, but we know that conscientious people get better grades, and it's reliable, and it's a powerful effect. And so if your time use is organized, then the probability that you're going to be successful is very high. So one of the things you might think about is make friends with a calendar, like Google Calendar or something like that. And I can tell you some tricks about that, because really it is important. Like, and I'm not kidding around about this. If you're low in conscientiousness, it's really going to trip you up as you walk through life. There's not very many advantages to it that I've been able to see, and I'm not assuming that just because you don't follow a schedule, you're low in conscientiousness, but it is one of the items that mark it. The advantage I've seen so far to being unconscientious is that if you become unemployed, it doesn't bother you as much. And I mean, that actually turns out to matter in some situations. So, like, you know, if a big company has to shed 50% of its employees, it's the conscientious people are going to suffer themselves to death for it. And the unconscientious people, they're not going to care anyways, because they weren't working anyways. So it doesn't matter if they have a job or not. So here's one way of thinking about making use of a schedule. Often people are afraid of schedules because they think of them as a trap. You know, you make a schedule and it's like this little prison that you have to live inside, and you know, and all you're doing in your schedule is putting down things you have to do or should do, and so, you know, there's not a lot of fun in that. And so not only is it a trap or a prison, but it's kind of an unpleasant one. But a way to work with the schedule in a lot more sophisticated way is to think, well, I'm going to plan the next week, say, because you plan it day by day, but we'll take the week as the unit level of analysis and think, well, I'd like to plan a week I'd like to have. And then your schedule all of a sudden becomes a tool for increasing the quality of your life. And that's a whole different issue, you know, because you might think, what's the emotion that you suffer, assuming you suffer one of these emotions? If you have an essay that's due and you're not doing it, like, would you regard that as a pleasant emotion or unpleasant emotion? Okay, so do you think you can characterize the unpleasantness? Like, what kind of emotion is it? It's guilt, okay. Anything else? Frustration? Yeah, so you're sort of frustrated with yourself. Yeah, you need a slap, right? You think, I need a slap. So, okay, so guilt, anything else? Anxiety? Restlessness? So that's kind of an agitation. Yeah, it's because your body knows you should be doing something, but you know, you're not pointing it in the right direction, so it's shame? Is that reasonable? So, okay, so the reason I was asking you about that is because, you know, most of the negative emotions are associated with neuroticism, but some of them seem to be associated with conscientiousness. And the conscientious negative emotions seem to be guilt and shame, fundamentally. And so recent research, and really recent, I only got this paper like a week ago, I think it's about 4 months old, seem to indicate that conscientious people feel less guilt, but they're more guilt prone. So if they don't do something, that makes them guilty, but they organize their time so they are doing the things they're supposed to do, so then they don't feel guilty. So anyways, back to the schedule. So, all right, you think about your week and you think about your day, and you think, well, how would you improve the quality of a given day or a given week? Well, one of the ways of improving it is to not put yourself into the situation where there are things hanging over your head that you have to feel guilty and ashamed about, because that's a very unpleasant way of being. And you know, if you have an essay that's due in a week and you're procrastinating, then the fact that you have to do that essay can ruin the whole week. And even when you're doing something that's positive, hypothetically, it's kind of that horrible kind of positive that you experience when you know that you should be doing something else. And so that's when you end up watching YouTube videos about like dancing cats or something like that. You know, and it's at best it's a guilty pleasure. It's not a pleasure at all. You think like, what the hell am I doing watching videos of dancing cats, you know? But then you know that you're procrastinating, and that's low quality, very low quality existence. So if you use your schedule, you can think, okay, well, here's some times that I'm going to do this work. And then you can also sort of ask yourself about that when you're designing your schedule. Because you don't want to design a schedule like you're Adolf Hitler telling yourself what to do, you know, because you're not going to comply with it then. What you have to do if you're going to design a schedule is you have to ask yourself, all right, I'm going to set aside some time to study over the next week or to do this essay or whatever it is. How much time would I actually spend studying? An hour or two a day might be a worthwhile thing to schedule in, and I would say don't schedule in more than that to begin with, because then you'll fail and then you'll stop using the schedule. And so the other thing you want to do is you want to schedule in things that you want to do, and then you want to look at the day or the week and you want to think, hey, that's a week I'd like to have. If I had a week like that, it would be good. You know, I'd be caught up so that all that negative emotion doesn't have to accrue. And I would have done a bunch of things that I'm interested in doing, and at the end of the week I'd be in better shape than I was at the beginning. And if you treat a schedule like that, so that what you're using it is to design the days and weeks that you want to have, instead of using it as this little, you know, jail that you have to put yourself in that you're not going to do anyways, then you can learn to use them. And that's one thing you can do to make yourself more industrious, more conscientious. Follow a schedule.
I've told people to learn to use a schedule, and people often hate schedules because they act as their own tyrants, right? They say, well, you have to do this unpleasant thing, and then here's another unpleasant thing you have to do, and then you have to do this unpleasant thing, and you do that for about 3 days, and you think, to hell with this, I'm not doing that, you know, and you fall off the wagon. That isn't what you're supposed to do with a schedule. You're supposed to use it to design the days that you would like to have if you were taking care of yourself.
And so some of that is, you know, you wake up in the morning and you think, here's 5 things I have to do that if I don't do, my life will be worse. It's like paying bills, for example, or taking out the garbage. It's like you have to do those because otherwise things degenerate. So you got to put some of those in the schedule because otherwise tomorrow is worse than today, and that's a bad trajectory. But you also want to build in things, you know, you've got to act in some sense like you're dealing with a relatively recalcitrant 9-year-old. It's like, so, well, here's some things you have to do, but here's some things that if you do, you could reward yourself with. And if you get the balance there between obligation and reward right, then you'll find that you're motivated to do the things. And that's what you want to do. You want to do that so it's sustainable across days and weeks and months. And so you got to treat yourself like a good boss would treat a valued employee, and not like a tyrant would treat a slave, because the slave will rebel. And you know, people say, well, I don't follow through on my plans. It's like, well, A, they're probably not very well formulated, and maybe you're doing them because of an external moral obligation or something. They're not really your plans, right? And B, you're acting like a tyrant and a slave, and that's a bad relationship to have with yourself. Treat other people as you would like to be treated. It works both ways. You also treat yourself like you treat other people properly. So that's a necessary thing, and often people don't do that. But the scheduling is really important.
Any advice for students here?
Yeah, read great books. Really, man. You've got this 4-year period that has been carved out of your lives by society. It's given you an identity, like a high-quality identity, and freedom at the same time. And you're not going to get that again in your life. You've got a respectable identity, university student, and complete freedom associated with that, or as near as you're ever going to get. And you've got these unbelievable libraries that are full of the writings of people who are intelligent and articulate beyond comprehension. And you know, and you can go there and you can learn all this. And you might think, well, why should you learn it? Well, you learn it to get a job, or you learn it to get good grades, or you learn it to get a degree, and that's all nonsense. It's nonsense. The reason that you come to university to be educated is because there is nothing more powerful than someone who is articulate and who can think and speak. It's power, and I mean power of the best sort. It's authority and influence and respectability and competence. And so you come to university to craft your highest skill, and your highest skill is to be found in articulated speech. And if you're a master at formulating your arguments, you win everything. And better than that, when you win everything, everyone around you wins too. Because to transform yourself into, let's consider your transformation to something approximating the logos. It means you shine a light on the whole world. Well, there's nothing more exciting to do than that. There's nothing better you can possibly do. And to think that you're coming to university to be, you know, trained to have a job, it's like, great, that's a hell of a lot better than being unemployed and covered with Cheeto dust while you're snacking away in front of your video game in the basement. But it's not and I don't have anything against video games, by the way, but it's hardly a triumphant call to being in the world, and that's what university should be calling forth. It's like, God, you people, I know what Harvard students are like. I taught here for 5 years. You people are spectacular. You're spectacular. You're all capable of being world beaters. You transform yourself into something that's articulated and sensible and grounded in history and knowledgeable and wise, man. You can do anything you want, and hopefully anything you want for good. Because if you have any sense, everything you want to do would be for the good, because there's nothing more compelling or meaningful or useful in combating the tragedy of life than to struggle with all your soul on behalf of the good. And the universities have forgotten that. It's why everyone's bailing out of the humanities, and they should. The humanities are corrupt. And they're corrupt because they're not telling students this. It's so bloody obvious. It's like, learn to think, learn to speak, learn to read. It makes you a superpower, an individual superpower. I don't understand why that isn't just told to students. It's not that hard to understand, and everyone wants to hear it. It's like, really, I could do that? I could do that? It's like, yeah, really, you could do that. And the whole society around you has labored for really thousands of years to provide every single one of you with this spectacular opportunity that you have while you're undergraduates and graduate students here, man. Everyone's just praying that you would come here and manifest everything that you could manifest. And that's what you should be doing instead of waving placards and complaining about how you're oppressed, for God's sake. You see these Yale students complaining about their oppression. It just leaves me aghast. It's like, well, we're against the ruling class. It's like, no, you're baby ruling class members. You're young. The only reason you're not rich is because you're young. You know, that's the best. Really, if you look at the 1% even, the dreaded 1%, you know, most of those people are old. Why? Well, when you progress through life, if you're reasonably successful, you trade in your promising youth for your wealthy old age, but you're still bloody old. Would you trade it? Would you trade your youth for that? Like, if you factor age out of the economic equation, things look a lot different. Well, of course older people have more money. If they have any sense, they've been collecting it for their whole life. Is that somehow unfair? It's not unfair unless you want to be poverty-stricken when you're 70, and you don't want to be poverty-stricken when you're 70. I just don't understand what's happened to the universities. I can't believe that you're not told when you come the first day, look, man, you're here on a heroic mission. You're going to take your capacity to articulate yourself to levels that are undreamed of. You're going to come out of here unstoppable. You're going to be able to do anything you want. It's like, that's what you're here for. Instead, you're taught that, well, you know, the world's a pretty oppressive place, and you're probably the bottom of the victim pile, and there's virtually nothing you can do about it except, you know, deconstruct the patriarchy. And it's so weak-kneed and so pathetic that universities should be embarrassed that that's what they're peddling to students. I'm embarrassed by it. You know, I've gone on public record telling parents, bloody well send your boys to trade school, because at least they'll learn something useful. And that's a terrible thing for someone like me to say, because I do believe that that being articulated and educated in the highest possible manner there's nothing that's better for you and for society. And why have the universities forgotten this? Well, that's postmodern neo-Marxism for you, you know, and the philosophy of intense resentment and oppression and group identity, and God, it's just pathetic.
Dr. Peterson, I think a lot of students here would agree with you that one of the main purposes of education at college, particularly at Harvard, is to develop their sense of articulation, their ability to read, their ability to critically think. But then what comes after? Particularly at Harvard, there's a big discussion on what is a good life? What does it mean to use those skills that we get here, and then we graduate? What do we do from there?
Stop unnecessary suffering. That's what you do. You know, that's your calling. It's like you say, well, what do you do after you graduate? Well, if you graduate articulated and powerful, there will be people giving you so many opportunities you won't even be able to keep up with them. You know, I've worked with very, very competent people in many different domains in my life, hyper-competent people. And I can tell you some very interesting things about hyper-competent people. The first thing is they are not selfish, and they're not greedy. And one of the great pleasures in their lives is to find people who have the capacity to also be hyper-competent and to open doors for them as rapidly as they can possibly be opened. They delight in that, because there's very few things that are more intrinsically meaningful if you're an accomplished person than to find young people who have the possibility of being accomplished and say, hey, look, here's an opportunity for you. It's like, go out there, man, kill it. And then they go out there and kill it, and you think, right on, man. Here's another opportunity. Why don't you go out there and nail that too? And you think, no, they're all hoarding their wealth, and they're not going to share it with anyone. It's like, that's absolute, complete rubbish. And so you don't even have to worry about what you're going to do after you graduate from here if you turn yourself into half of what you could be, because people will be dying to offer you every opportunity that you can possibly make use of. So it's a moot point. The world is always desperately short of people who can think and speak. And you think, well, I won't be made use of. Well, first of all, you can't say that if you're at Harvard, for God's sake. I mean, people already figured out who you are. They've already figured it out. And they're offering you the world on a gold platter. Take it. It's yours. Take it. It's like, great, man. Put yourself together and deserve it. That would be great. And that's what everyone wants. It's what your parents want. It's also what you want. You know it. It's what you want. It's what women want from men. It's what men want from women. It's like for you to be who you could be. And the highest faculty of the human being is articulated speech. It's the divine faculty. And there is nothing more powerful than that. There's nothing that's even in the same league. And so if you don't have faith in that, then your priorities are misplaced. And I can't even understand why you wouldn't have faith in that being, say, Harvard students, because look where it's got you already. You know, you're already sitting on top of the world. So deserve it, make use of it. Right? Go out there and fix things up. That's what you need to do. There's lots of things that need to be fixed up. And what you want to do is burden yourself with so much responsibility that you can barely stand. And then you'll get stronger trying to lift it up. And you won't be asking, what should I be doing with my life? Or what's the meaning of life? Or any of that. It'll be self-evident. It's self-evident. At minimum, you can say, there's more suffering in the world than there should be. And I could probably do something about that. And you can do something about that. So go do something about it. And then there'll be less suffering in the world. And then when you're 80, you can look back on your life and say, well, you know, there's less suffering in the world than there would have been had I known it existed. And you don't have to even have a sense of ultimate destiny or even any sort of theistic belief to regard that as a positive good. Like, I think it goes beyond the mere pragmatic utility of addressing the world's ills, because I think we do live in a world that has a transcendent reality as well as the reality that we can detect. But even independently of that, it doesn't matter. I called the course Personality and Its Transformations, and I think you could think about that as a restatement of the idea of being and becoming. And that's what you are. You're, for whatever that means, you're an entity that both is and is transforming. And there's a rule that goes along with that, by the way, which is don't sacrifice who you could be for who you are. Which means if you have to choose to transform in a positive direction or maintain your current position, then it's better to transform in a positive direction. So you might even think of that as the core of your being. That's a Piagetian idea. It's a Jungian idea as well. Who are you? You're the thing that transforms who you are. Now, you're also who you are, but on top of that, you're the thing that transforms who you are. And I do think that that's not an arbitrary statement. You know, one of the things that modern universities do dreadfully now is convince their students that value structures are relative, and that's a big mistake. There's a lot of things wrong with that idea, and one of the things that's wrong with that idea is that doesn't include what I just mentioned, which is that's a good moral rule, is you are the thing that is and you're the thing that becomes, and you should put the thing that becomes at a higher place than the thing that is. That means you also have to allow yourself to shake off those things about you that you might be pathologically attached to, habits and people for that matter, ways of thinking, all of those things. You have to allow yourself to shake those off, and that's more like a burning. That's why the phoenix is the symbol that it is, right? It's old and it deteriorates, it bursts into flame, and then it's reborn. It's like, well, do you want to be reborn? It's like, well, that's not the question. The question is, do you want to burst into flame? And the answer to that generally is no. But that's the wrong answer. The right answer is you let all that nonsense burn away. And you might say, well, I don't know what I should leave behind. And the answer to that is that's a lie. You know some of the things that you should leave behind. All you have to do is ask yourself. You'll come up with a list instantly of 100 stupid things that you're doing that you know you could stop doing. Some of them maybe you don't know you could stop doing. It's like, well, fine, leave those alone for now. But there's a bunch of things you perfectly know well that you could stop doing that would improve your life. And so do that, see what happens. That's a good idea. All right. So it's personality and its transformations, because partly I wanted to talk to you about what you are as a human being and also as an individual, but also what you could become. And that's actually a crucial question in the domains of clinical psychology in particular, because a lot of what you're doing with people as a clinician is trying to figure out who they could become. That's right. You have a problem, your life isn't what it could be. It's like, fine, let's see what it could be like if we changed it. We'll figure out how to change it. That's got to be a negotiated dialogue, right? Because like, I don't know what the hell you should do with your life. I can help you figure it out, maybe. We can talk about it, but you are the person who has to decide if the things that you're aiming for, get you out of bed in the morning, because that's at least one of the crucial issues. So you got to specify the goal. And then you got to specify the transformation processes and start practicing them. And you have to understand that you're going to be bad at it, but it doesn't matter, because bad's fine. Persistent is what you need to be. If you persist, with tiny improvements, if you persist, you win. So, okay, so in a broader context, you can think about this as a more fundamental ontological question. So the one question is how you should act in the world. The other question is, well, what is the world? And that's a complicated problem. This is a scientific answer to that question, and that is that the world is a collection of objective phenomena, and that's a very powerful perspective. And we have a good method for determining what the world is like as a collection of objective phenomena, and that's made us very technologically powerful, and so more power to us and all that, but leaves a question unanswered. And the question is, well, the world isn't just a place of objective phenomena, because it's not a panoply of inert matter. It has living conscious creatures in it, and they're a different order of being. And the fundamental issue for conscious active creatures is not what is the world from an objective perspective, but how it is that you should conduct yourself in the world. And there's a kind of unbridgeable gap between those two domains of inquiry. And I think the reason for that is that the scientific method removes value from its descriptions. That's actually what it does. And so once you're left with value-free descriptions, it's very difficult to extract out a value proposition from them, because that's the scientific method removes the value propositions. You're supposed to be left with only that which is objective, right? And value propositions are in the domain of the subjective. So I think the idea that you can derive what you should be or do from a collection of facts is flawed, A, because collecting the facts themselves gets rid of the value structure, but B, there's an infinite number of facts, and so how are you going to pick which ones should guide you? You can't. You have to do something else. The facts do not tell you what to do with the facts. You need something else to help you figure that out. Well, it's come to me over the years that that's what the narrative cognitive framework does. It's the framework that we use to specify how we should act in the world. And so you could divide the world into the world as it is and the world as perhaps it should be. That gives you some direction, and you need that, and we know this technically, right? You need direction. The reason for that is it's direction that produces primary positive emotion. And so if you need positive emotion to move through life, which you do, because you can't even move without positive emotion, and also positive emotion is a good bulwark against terror and pain. If you need those things, then you need direction, you need a goal, you need a value structure. So that doesn't seem particularly disputable to me. You could still say, well, what value structure? It's like, okay, fine, that's a good question. But I've thought a lot about that too. So if we're going to adopt a value structure, there's a couple of rules that go along with it. And this is why the bloody postmodernists are wrong, as far as I can tell, is A, it can't just be my value structure, because I'm stuck with you. And we're both stuck with all these other people. And so if I'm going to lay out a value structure, which is a way of interpreting the world, let's say, and there's an infinite number of potential ways of interpreting the world, it's like, yeah, fine, no problem, except that I have to interpret the world in a way that I can use while I'm dealing with you, and while the two of us are dealing with everyone else, and while all of you are dealing with everyone else. And so that's the Piagetian game proposition. If you want to be a popular kid on the playground, you better play games that other people want to play. That's a brilliant observation. And I told you that Piaget was trying to heal the rift between science and religion, and that's one of the things that he did that he thought helped do that. The question is, well, where do moral judgments come from? Well, they emerge as a consequence of consensus, and it's a bounded domain. If we're going to occupy the same space for any length of time, and those are two critical propositions, the same space and a long time, then we have to figure out how to play an iterative game that doesn't spiral downward, hopefully that might even improve, that we both don't object to, because otherwise it's not going to work, right? You'll walk away and play another game, or the game will disintegrate catastrophically. So there's massive social constraint on what constitutes an appropriate frame of reference. So much for the relativist argument. And then there's another issue that's equally relevant, and it's associated with the idea of objective reality to some degree. But that's not exactly correct, because it's not exactly objective reality. Let's say that you and I decide to occupy the same place for some substantial amount of time, and we figured out how to solve the problem of being together. But you and I still have to figure out how to solve the problem of being together in a manner that doesn't make the world object too much, And it isn't just other people, although that's a huge part of the world. You want them to not object. You may even want them to support you. That would even be better. But you also have to deal with the tendency of matter to object. Because so your mode of being in the world, your interpretive framework, as a description of how you should act, is actually the laying out of a strategy that will produce the ends that it predicts, which are the things that you want. So this is the pragmatist perspective. This was worked out by William James and his people back in the late 1800s in New England, the only genuine brand of American philosophy. And what the pragmatist said is, how do you decide if something's true? The answer is, how the hell can you? You don't know anything. Well, that's true, but that isn't helpful, because there you're stuck with the problem of how to be in the world. Well, so what you do is you lay out a mode of interpretation that has an endpoint. And then you run the mode of interpretation, embodied, right, because you act it out. And if it doesn't produce the outcome, then it's not, well, let's say, true. The claims within it they're not true by the definition of the game itself. So you might say, well, you're a kid on a playground. You want to play a game. One of the implicit demands is that the game is fun. If it's not fun, it's not worth playing. So you play it for a while, and then you see, well, was that fun? If the answer is yes, then you keep playing the game. You say, well, that game it's good enough, it's accurate enough, it's true enough. And so you lay out interpretations in the world, and they're subject to massive constraints. Other people have to go along with them and cooperate with you, because if they don't, then look the hell out, like it's a major, serious, non-trivial constraint. And then the other thing is, well, social proof isn't good enough. It also has to work in the world outside of the social world. You know, so if you have an illness and you have some hypothesis about how to construe it, you might say, well, is my understanding of the illness correct? Well, it implies that I take these actions. Well, how do you know if it's correct? Well, you take the actions, and if the illness gets worse, then by the definitions that are implicit in the framework of reference that you're using, you've made an error. And so there's no relativism in that. You could still say, well, there's a lot of potential solutions to any potential set of problems. It's like, yeah, there's lots of different ways to play chess on a single board. Right, but that doesn't mean that any old solution is as good as any other solution. It doesn't mean that at all. So, okay, so then we're looking at things two ways. We're trying to figure out, well, how does the world present itself, and then how is it that you should act in it? And so, well, there's other constraints on the mechanisms of interpretation that you place in the world. So we could say, well, you're constrained in your interpretations by the constraints that other people place on you. But there's internal constraints as well. We talked about those mostly from a biological perspective, because you could also regard yourself in some sense as a loose internal society. And that's sort of a psychoanalytic dictum, right? You're a collection of sub-personalities, or you could say you're a collection of sub-routines. I don't care how you formulate it, but you're a unity, but you're a unity that brings together a plurality of subcomponents. And part of the constraints on how it is that you lay out your interpretation of the world is that you have to satisfy those internal subsystems, right? So you're the ego, but it's more like you're the captain of a ship full of people who are rowing. You got to keep the people rowing. You're not tyrant. You're not omnipotent tyrant of your own destiny. You're constrained by the nature of your own being. And so you have to provide yourself with food, and you have to provide yourself with shelter, and you have to provide yourself with water, and all of these things. And those are demands that are laid on you by the nature of your internal processes. And of course, how they lay themselves out as demands and what the appropriate solutions to that is, to those problems are, is debatable infinitely. But you can see the constraints stack up. You have to satisfy your internal constraints. So they have to be brought into a unity. That seems to happen, at least in part, between the ages of 2 and something like between the ages of birth and 4 years old, maybe even 2 years old. You bring yourself together into something that's sort of functioning as a unity. Then you have to turn that unity into a unity that can function in the social world with increasing breadth. And that unity in the social world has to be a unity that can function inside the natural world. It's something like that. So you're stacking up these games into a hierarchy of increasing complexity. And one of the questions that emerges from that is, well, what should be at the top of the hierarchy? If it's a hierarchical structure, it has to be a hierarchical structure, because some things have to be worth doing more than others, or you can't act, which is another thing I really don't like about the postmodernist ethos, because it claims that value structures are there to eliminate, to exclude and oppress, and never once notices that, well, yeah, fair enough, but value structures are also there so that you know which way to walk, because you can't figure out which way to walk without saying that that direction is preferable to that direction. So you're stuck with the damn things. And they do exclude. Obviously, category structures exclude. The question is, if you're going to have a value structure, how is it that it should be constituted? Well, I already described some of the constraints. Like if your value structure is perfectly functioning except that you don't get enough to eat, that turns out actually to be a fatal problem, right? And it might be, you can run into all sorts of fatal problems. You're too lonesome. Well, it means let's say that your value structure is too narcissistic. There's lots of reasons to be lonesome, but that might be one of them. Or you're too timid or something like that. Like you're going to be informed by your own internal biological mechanisms when the value structure that you're laying out in the world is insufficient to keep itself propagating across time. And some of that's just you, and some of that's other people, and some of that's the natural world. Constraints galore. And so in the face of all those constraints, it's absolutely unreasonable to say any old solution goes. Just try it. Generate a random solution. Run it as a simulation in the world. And see how many slings and arrows come your way. There'll be plenty. And you might say, well, I don't care about slings and arrows. It's like, yeah, no. That's a claim you don't get to make. So, okay, so you're being informed internally as to the nature of your value structure. You have to specify where you are. You have to specify where you're going. You have to integrate all your underlying biological mechanisms into that schema. It's something I think that's actually kind of weak about the Piagetian ideas, hey? Because Piaget, I'm a great fan of Piaget, but Piaget tended to think that the child came into the world with nothing but a set of reflexes. I mean, that's his technical claim, and that you bootstrap off those reflexes, and I think it underestimates the degree to which the child comes into the world as an already prepared unit. And I mean, he just thought of those things as so self-evident that you don't need to talk about them, but that's actually not true. You do need to talk about them. We know, for example, that if you provide children with food and shelter, and adequate food and shelter, but you don't interact with them socially, almost all of them die in the first year, right? It's not optional. Touch is not optional for children. Attention is not optional for children. Play is not optional for children. So it isn't just like, well, the child comes into the world with a set of reflexes and can adapt to any old environment. It's like, no, the environment has to be structured in a certain way or the child will die. And it's very interesting when it comes to things like play and touch, because you wouldn't think of those as fundamental necessities, right? But it turns out that they are. If you deprive a child badly enough of play and touch in the first 3 years of their life, even if they survive, what comes out at the end of that is often something that's like barely recognizable as a functional human being and cannot be repaired after that point. And that experiment was done with Romanian orphans back in the 90s. So it was an ugly situation, to say the least. Okay, so now you take these underlying biological systems and maybe they aggregate themselves into something that vaguely looks like your temperament, your 5 temperamental dimensions. So maybe if you're an extrovert, you're dominated by the dopaminergic system, just like you are if you're high in openness. And if you're high in neuroticism, it's mostly that you're dominated by anxiety systems and systems that mediate emotional pain. And if you're agreeable, you're dominated by the function of the underlying maternal/care affiliation systems. But so you could say, well, you've got a multitude of fundamental biological predispositions that manifest themselves as implicit stories, something like that, and they organize themselves into the primary temperaments, and the primary temperaments are biasing factors that determine in part the nature of the interpretive structure that you're going to lay out in the world. It's not entirely determined by your temperament. We know that personality is only predicting, something like, let's say, 10% of the variance in most complex social outcomes. And the other elements are, well, temperamental as you might be, you still have to get along with other people and the world. So you come in with these internal biases, but they still have to be modified extensively by your social and your natural surround. Okay, and then you develop your routines from the bottom up, as Piaget pointed out, and sometimes from the top down, because now and then you can think yourself into a radical transformation. But mostly what you're doing is building the micro units of your interpretive schemas and your behaviors and aggregating them into higher order structures that you can then tag with higher order abstractions. And we talked about that. You can't tell a 3-year-old to clean up his room. And the reason for that is those are empty boxes as far as the kid's concerned. Clean, he might have room, he might have that. Clean, he doesn't have. He might have pick up the teddy bear and put it in that space, right? So that's one of these little micro routines. And maybe you say, you put 20 of those micro routines together, and now you can say, clean up your room. And basically what you're saying is, implement the 10 micro routines that you've learned. And so a well-functioning personality has all the micro routines in place. That's actually something that you help people with if you're a behavioral therapist, because one of the things you assume if you're a behavioral therapist is that sometimes the reason people aren't doing things is because they don't know how. You know, sometimes maybe the person's depressed but potentially high functioning. They got all the damn micro routines. They're well socialized. They're just dormant. You got to get them awake again and implementing them. But sometimes you get someone in your practice, say, who's just been neglected like you cannot believe, right? The parents never paid any attention to them, or maybe just punished them every time they did something good. That's really fun. And then, you know, they didn't make friends, and so they're really, really vague and poorly articulated. And so then what you do is you work at the bottom of the micro routines and get them to practice building up all these little attributes that they didn't build up. And you know, one of the things you can think about in terms of character development is, so now maybe you understand something about your own personality. You might say, well, what could you do to improve your personality? And the answer is, develop some of the micro routines on the other side of the personality distribution. So if you're disagreeable as hell, maybe you could start learning how to do nice things for people. And that actually works, by the way. So if you take disagreeable people who are depressed and you get them doing nice things for other people, their depression tends to lift. But then by the same token, if you're agreeable, then you should practice doing some things for yourself and being more tough-minded in your negotiations. And so you can sort of place yourself on the personality trait distribution. You know, you're extroverted. It's like, okay, man, learn to spend some time with yourself, right? You're low in openness. Well, try reading a book that's outside of your, you know, your sphere of interest now and then. If you're conscientious, well, you should probably learn how to relax occasionally, and so forth. So you can, I think partly what you're doing as you're developing your personality is not moving the mean much, the average, where, you know, where you're located, but you're extending the standard deviation so that you're a bigger bag of tricks than you were before. And I think you can practice that consciously. It's like, you're hyper orderly. It's, well, get a dog, you know. Dogs are messy, horrible things, you know. It's just what you need if you're hyper orderly, because they're going to leave hair everywhere and force you to live with it. If you write a book, which is virtually impossible, and then get a publisher, which is virtually impossible, you probably have a rejection rate of 99%. So then if you do manage to publish the book with a reasonable publisher, which you won't because it's impossible, then you get 8% royalties. That's it. So 92% of your labor goes to the sales, marketing, and distribution end of things. And so it's just, so it's very, very difficult to generate capital as an entrepreneur. And there's innumerable impediments. One of the things that people do, and this is something for those of you who might be entrepreneurially minded, here's another thing that you have to understand, is that you can't really create a product and then launch it. Because first of all, you don't know how to do that. You might know how to create the product, but you do not know how to market or sell it. You don't know how to advertise it. You don't know how to communicate about it. You don't know how to ship it. Like, there's all sorts of things you just don't know. But worse is you don't know if people will use it. And so what companies do that roll out new products on a relatively continual basis do is they don't develop the product and then go sell it. They continually communicate with their customers about what product the customer is willing to buy next, and then they develop that. And so you have to have your market identified, and then you have to be in continual communication with the market while you develop the product. It's not, I build a better mousetrap and the world comes, you know, marching to my door. That isn't how it works. Is that you got to find out if someone wants to buy your stupid thing. And then the next thing is that even if you have a great thing, you're going to go talk to people and they have 50 great things that they might buy. And they're all great, but they're not going to buy all 50. They might buy one, maybe, and maybe they'll buy it this week, but probably they'll buy it in 6 months. And they're not going to buy any of them, no matter how great, unless they're on fire and you're selling water. Because they're so busy already, right? They're so overwhelmed and preoccupied by their jobs that if you come in and you say, well, here, this is going to increase your efficiency by 20%, and here's the 3 weeks you'd have to spend doing that, and then the payoff would come in the next years, they'll say, yeah, well, I'll do that as soon as I have time. And as soon as I have time is never. So if they're on fire and you have water, you can sell it to them. But that's all, because otherwise it's a no-go. So those are all things that are worthwhile knowing, because they're very hard to learn. And so, and very comically, I mean, if you would have told me when I first started developing these tests that one of the reasons corporations wouldn't buy them was because they worked, that I would have just thought, really? I mean, come on, really? That's really the reason? It's like, yeah, that's the reason. God. So very, very, very problematic. And then they already have their processes in place and they're entrenched. And then the next problem is, you know, you haven't got any customers. I think I told you that before. You don't have any customers and you show them the statistics, but they can't understand the statistics. And they also have 200 other people selling them things, and 50 of them are crooks. So they're just lying about what they're doing, and they can't tell the difference between the liars and the people who are telling the truth. And so they can't understand the statistics for themselves, and they can't verify them anyways. So what they ask you is, who else is using it? And if the answer is, well, everybody, then you don't even have to do the sale because you're already rich. And if the answer is nobody, then they're going to say, well, why is nobody using this? You say, well, it's the hottest thing that's come along. And they think, well, I'm not going to be the sucker who gets painted, you know, red and fired because this failed. That they do not think this might make me succeed. People do not care about whether or not they succeed. They care about whether or not they fail. And so that's another thing, is that if you're marketing something and you can say, this will stop you from being identified as a failure, then people might be happy about that. But if you say, this will really help you succeed, it's like, yeah, no, I don't want to succeed. I just don't want to fail. I don't want to succeed. I just want to be invisible and be left alone. And if you're looking for people's fundamental motivation, that's it. It's they want to be invisible and they want to be left alone. I tell you the zebra story? Any of you know that story? Okay, I'll tell you this zebra story. Stop me if I've told it to you before. This tells you everything you need to know about human beings. So it's worth knowing. Okay, so zebras have stripes. And people say, well, that's for camouflage. And then you think about that for 2 seconds and you think, that's a really stupid theory, because lions are camouflaged and they're like golden like the grass. And zebras are black and white, so you can see a zebra 5 miles away. It's like, there's a zebra, it's black and white. So the whole camouflage thing, that's just not working out so well as a hypothesis. Okay, so biologists go and they decide to take a look at some zebras. And so they're looking at a zebra on the herd, because there's no zebra, right? Just like there's no fish. There are schools of fish and there are herds of zebras. There isn't a fish. This is why I think the cod aren't coming back. There are no cod. There are massive 100-mile-long schools of cod, 10 stories deep, 20 million years old. You wipe out the school, you don't just get to throw a cod in the water and say, well, you know, off you go. It's like, well, where's my city? It's like launching you in the middle of a field. It's like, well, go out there and reproduce. It's like, no, that's not going to happen, you know? So without the school, there's no cod, and you can't just introduce a whole school of cod because you don't have a whole school of cod. So, you know, maybe the cod are never coming back. And zebras are the same thing. There's not a zebra. There's zebras. And so you're looking at the zebras, trying to study a zebra, and you look at the zebra and you make some notes and you look up and you think, oh, Christ, which zebra was I looking at? And the answer to that is you don't know, because the camouflage is against the herd. And the black and white stripes. There's a variety of reasons for the stripes. Flies also seem not to like the stripes, but you know, usually things evolve for multiple reasons. But anyways, it's very difficult to parse out a zebra against the herd. You look down, you look up, it's like, uh-oh, all those damn zebras look the same. Yes, the camouflage is effective, but it's against the herd. All right, so then you think, well, we better identify a zebra so we can see what he's up to. So then you take your Jeep and a can of red paint and a stick with a rag on the end of it, and you drive up to the zebras and you paint their haunch red a little bit, put a nice red dot on their haunch, or maybe clip their ear with a cattle clip. And then you stand back and you think, hey, I'm pretty smart, now I'm going to watch that zebra. So what do you think happens to the zebra? The lions kill it. Right. Because lions, they're smart, right? Hunting animals are smart. But they have to identify a zebra before they can organize their hunt. They can't just hunt the whole herd. They have to pick out a zebra. And so maybe it's like a zebra that's got a sore hip or something. And so you think, well, nature's kind. It just takes the weak. It's no, zebra or lions like really healthy, delicious zebras. But they look like all the other healthy, delicious zebras, so they can't get a bead on them. But if they're small and just born, or if they're limping, or there's something that identifies them, then the lions can pick them out. And then they do pick them out. And so the rule for human beings is keep your damn stripes on so the lions don't get you. And I'm telling you, man, if you want to remember one thing from my class about human motivation, that's a good thing to learn. People camouflage themselves against the herd, and they like to be in the middle of the herd, which is what fish do, by the way. If you have a big school of fish, the smart, healthy, large fish are in the middle of the school. Because you know what you call fish on the outside of the school? Bait. Right. So that's what people are doing. They're trying to move into the middle of the herd all the time. And the herd moves around, or the school moves around, and people are going, well, I'm in the middle. I'm staying in the middle here. So I've got this protective ring of people around me so the predators don't pick me out and do me in. So, okay, so that's part of the reason why I said, well, you can't sell something to someone for success. Because, you know, you're thinking, well, people are aiming at success. Don't be thinking that. It's not by any means necessarily true. Trait neuroticism is a powerful motivator. And trait neuroticism is, let's not be too threatened or hurt, right? That's the negative emotion system. And the negative emotion system is a killer source of motivation. You know, you also see that there are scales of well-being that have been designed, mostly by social psychologists, which means they're very bad scales most of the time, because their psychometric capacity is absurdly low, generally speaking. So what you find with scales of well-being, sometimes they're talked about as scales of happiness even, is that people aren't after happiness, they're after not hurting. It's not, so they don't want to be extroverted and enthusiastic, right? And bubbly and full of smiles and laughter. That isn't what they mean by I want to be happy. What they mean is I don't want to be anxious or in pain. And so well-being scales tend to be something like emotional stability plus extroversion. But the big loading is on emotional stability, the reverse of neuroticism. You want to avoid suffering. You don't want to be happy. You want to avoid suffering. And one way to avoid suffering is not to let the lions gnaw on you. And one way of doing that is to stay in the middle of the damn herd. And so, like, I'm not being a smart aleck about this. I understand why people do that. There's real danger to being visible. There's real danger in being visible. Now, you might be successful if you're visible, but you also might be dead.
So I'd be interested in hearing some more impressions. If you'd be kind enough to deliver some of them. What are your favorites?
Let me conjure up the gods here.
That is what I'm trying to do, when I'm doing that. It's like, let's get those words out of the chaos.
It is helpful when I saw you looking up, because everybody has this shame when they're thinking, you know, and you look down. So that's a habit I pulled from you. You're not even in my impressions, but it just conveys confidence. When you're thinking, to go, you know, you're going to put your head up and make yourself vulnerable, opposed to, well, what did she like in bed?
I hadn't really thought about it as a more open posture, but that's right. It is a more open posture. Well, and you're also, you know, turning your eyes heavenward symbolically, and you embody your meanings. That's the deepest sense of meaning, is what's embodied, right? What you're actually acting out. And it is a form of searching for the words, to find them, not to calculate them, but to find them. That's how Moses crossed the Red Sea, you know, by looking for a firm foundation in the chaos.
We all know that.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing to know, you know, because you'll find some chaos, and you need to know how to get through it. And you look for a firm foundation, and you can feel your words, and they can be solid, and then you're okay, or as okay as you can be. And so, you know, okay, so...
Or as Donald Trump says, Rosie O'Donnell, what a fat pig, right? What a fat pig. Did you see his video about him talking about Ozempic?
No.
Oh my God.
No.
Oh, this will cure any depression. I would say get rid of the Xanax and go watch. It just surfaced. I was in bed sick the other day, and I just cried laughing. He's talking about a friend of his who's on Ozempic. And he's like, you know, I have this friend, he's a billionaire, right? And he takes the fat shot drug, right? The fat shot drug. And he's in London. He says, it costs $12. I'm here getting the fat drug, the fat shot, and it costs $1,300 in the US. And he's calling Ozempic the fat shot. And I just thought, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life.
He's very underestimated as a comedian.
He's starting to get the credit, I think.
I think he
now.
is. I think he
Yeah.
is. He's very funny in a Bill Burr sort of way.
In a just...
When Bill Burr was particularly funny.
Right. When he was a little funnier, right? Now it's talking about Black Lives Matter, right? You know, these white guys, these Jordan Petersons, right? These pseudo-intellects, right? On a Monday, doing the podcast now, he's brutal, right? He's always getting gum off his fingers, right? What is he doing? What is he, tickling a child? No, it's brutal. It's brutal. No, I used to love Bill.
Yeah.
That was one of the first I did, Bill Burr.
That was good. That was good. Oh, you know that.
I did a Bill Burr master class. I did the whole prosthetic bald thing, and it was him teaching young comedians how to do comedy, and he just would lose his cool, you know, and just grab the microphone from him. So I booked a studio like this. You know, that was one of the blessings of, I guess, not getting an agent and all that stuff, was I had to just make my own stuff.
Yeah, you had more freedom.
Yeah, so that was one of the first, was the Bill Burr teaching kids.
Show me some more.
Oh God. What else do I do? All right, this is Owen Wilson. You know Owen Wilson? Owen Wilson, if he was a dog. Okay. See. Bow wow. That's it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That's good.
It. That's one
good.
I would call my stupidest joke.
Yeah.
But works better than almost anything I do. And
I think it works because, well, it's certainly not too long.
It's very
they say brevity is the soul of wit, right? But that you had the mannerisms and you got the voice dead on.
Sure.
So it's worth the apprehension, and it pays off, even though it's a very small dose.
And it's what I grew up on. I think I definitely turned very bitter from all the stuff happening in the world and stuff. You know, I'm sure I've seen you go through ebbs and flows of being softer, and interviews where I could tell you're, you know, a little more hard. But I do want to get back to that silly, you know, just silly physical comedy, you know, stuff everybody can laugh at.
Yeah.
I had to go in really hard on all the stuff, the wokeism and all that stuff. And that'll be a gift that is laid out forever.
It's nice to be able to do things with a sense of play.
Yeah.
That's the optimal state, if you can manage that.
That's also,
even with serious things. That's hard.
It's a good test of when I do have the courage to approach a person of the opposite sex to ask them for coffee before getting dragged away by security. I am testing for playfulness.
Yeah.
You know, I'll always do something a little playful, a little silly, and see if they recoil or if they play along a bit.
Right.
Yesterday I went and I just...
Right. Well, that's why little boys and little girls play together, you know, so that they can learn how to play together.
And I'm stuck in this little boy body here.
So let's see some more impressions if you're inclined.
More,
yeah.
Well, what else do I do? I do the, what you remember when Mitch McConnell, he froze up when he was talking.
Yeah.
So I do a joke about our politicians are so old, no one even notices when they have strokes, because he really froze for a while. He was doing and the fellow and I'll hold that for about 10 minutes on stage. I'll just hold it until people stop laughing.
That's 1/9 of the whole set.
That's the Mitch. I'm very dedicated. 20 minutes is me as Biden trying to get up the stairs. I just do it in real time.
So now you said that you're not scripting your sets.
I used to have a set list right on, and I'd go boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Because I had never done a full hour. You do these comedy club sets that are 10 to 15 minutes.
Right.
With 10
right.
people.
90, you're doing 90 minutes now.
Sometimes I'll do 90, 80 to 90.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it also helps me rely on myself and not have someone go out there and warm up the crowd.
Mm-hmm. Right, you have to warm up your own crowd.
I have to warm
Are you
up
getting better at it?
Yeah.
What are you learning?
Well, you go out and you might just, feel what the energy is.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're rustling around, and the other night I just got a vacuum from backstage, and I just vacuumed the crowd for 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Until they settled down.
Until they focused.
And
you know, one of the things I tell speakers is not to start speaking until everyone is silent, right? Because if you start speaking before they're silent, you've given them permission to rustle around and talk.
Right.
So you wait. And if you wait, everyone will go silent, partly because they're wondering what the hell's going on,
Yeah.
right? Because they're expecting you to start. So you just wait. Then it's dead silent. Then you wait a little longer because you want people thinking, what the hell's going on here? Then they're paying attention. Then you go. That's
Right.
much better.
And I saw you do that at the Beacon. And as a comedian, you might go, I liked what Jordan did. You know what? I'm going to hold it for 10 more seconds. And maybe I'll walk off.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Man in the Moon, who was that? Kaufman.
Andy Kaufman.
Kaufman.
Yes.
He would do that
Yes.
on live TV, right? Hold that silence till the producers were willing to pull the plug, and then he'd
Brilliant.
start. Yeah.
He definitely influenced me quite a bit.
It takes a lot of confidence to do that, to hold that silence.
If you take a risk like that up top, though, the crowd also might trust you and go, geez, that guy's got some balls.
Yeah.
You know, we might be a little more submissive now.
Well, the crowd wants to know. The crowd is hoping that there's a reason they're there paying attention to you. And if you don't think that there's a reason, if you're not in
screwed.
control, and I don't mean command, I mean if you're not orchestrating the event, well, what the hell good are you? Right? I mean, you're the one that's point of focus, and so it's up to you to indicate some confidence
You have to.
and some invitation.
Something like a general theory of meaning. That's really what I've been working on, I would say, for 35 years, something like a general theory of meaning. And so I'm going to see if I can deliver the whole damn thing in 35 minutes, so which I've never really been able to manage, but I've had a lot of practice, so maybe this is the night. So, okay, so the first thing I want to tell you about is a little bit about how you perceive things, because it's very important to know how you perceive things. And you don't perceive very much, by the way, because, well, there's a lot of the world, way more than you can possibly imagine, and there's not that much of you, and so a lot of information is coming in through a very narrow channel, and it isn't easy, given the fact that all that information exists, it isn't easy to figure out how to narrow that channel so that the information you get is the information that you need. It's information you need that also gives you a grip on the world, right? It has to be practically useful, true and practically useful, something like that. It's a very, 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 very difficult problem to solve. And a lot of it you don't even really solve, because you can't. It's too complicated. You solve it by doing what you're doing right now, for example. So here you are in this unbelievably beautiful building, and I read today a little bit about it, and today it would cost about $1 billion to build this building. And so you're sitting here, and you're all sitting here peacefully, and you're all pointing in the same direction, right? And we're all basically doing the same thing, and we're doing it peacefully, and we can all focus on the same thing, and we had to invest $1 billion for that to be able to happen. And so you think about that, is that part of the way your society solved the problem of the complexity of the world for you was by investing $1 billion in what, how long did it take to construct this place? 15 years, something like that. Maybe it was longer. So that you could sit here in relative comfort and peace and tranquility and concentrate on something that's very focused, maybe something of beauty, something of artistic merit, something of intellectual merit, and that the rest of the world wasn't there, so you didn't have to worry about it. And that's not all. It's not just that you're here in this building and the chairs aren't falling apart and the floor is reliable and the electrical lights work and the sound quality is good and like all the technology is working, and there's people beetling away in the background like mad constantly everywhere, making sure that those impossible things keep happening so that you don't have to be distracted. But then you're also sitting with people who are roughly like you, roughly like you enough so that when they come into a venue like this, they know enough to sit down in the seats and face forward and not turn around and look at the person behind them, which would make them very nervous, right? Which would be an indication that that person isn't playing the same game as everyone else, and so God only knows what they're up to, because you just wouldn't want that, right? You wouldn't want the guy in front of you turning around and just looking at you for the next 90 minutes. And, well, it's worth thinking about why. Like, well, what are you thinking about? You're going to be sitting there looking like this. Your eyes are going to be darting around, and maybe you're going to be nudging someone and, pointing at this person because maybe they have some idea of what this person is up to, because you don't. And the problem is, if you don't know what that person is up to, then they could be up to anything. And anything is a lot of things to be up to. And you don't want people to be up to anything. You want them to be up to the one or two things they're supposed to be up to while they're with you in this narrow place that you occupy, right? And that's sort of the hallmark of a civilized and socialized person, is when we interact under 90% of conditions, 99% of conditions, you show me your persona. It's just a very narrow slice of yourself, and I show you mine at the bank, say, or at the grocery store, when we pass each other casually in the street. We nod and say hi, and you nod and say hi, or we just walk by peacefully, and like we're seething with complexity, and we don't let any of that out. And the reason for that is we don't want anybody else to let any of it out either. Right? So we keep ourselves simplified, and we build our architecture for that. And so, you come into a building like this, and the building tells you what to do. The chairs are all aligned. The chairs say, sit on me, right? The chairs are all facing the same way in kind of a semicircle, and they say, face the stage. And there's a stage. And so you come in here, and all the perceptual problems are solved. And so there's all this technology, and there's all this expense, and then there's the shared culture that enables you to know that this is something like a theatrical experience. And so what you do at a theatrical experience is come together as a group and remain silent but attentive, participating in that manner, and watch and listen to the main performance. And you all know that. It's part of the shared culture. And so that shared culture is also enabling you to perceive what you're perceiving right now as a protective mechanism. And that's part of a broader shared sense of civilization, and it's dependent on a shared government. And then there's other forms of protection, the sun isn't shining on us too brutally because we have a roof, and we're not in danger of warfare because you have borders, and you have an armed forces, and you have policemen, and it's like, Christ, there's just things going on around you like mad to ensure that you can sit here so peacefully and so much as if the world isn't a complex place for an hour and a half and do something this focused. And so that's partly how you solve the perceptual problem. You don't see the world that much. You screen a lot of it out. Now, there's a good illustration of this. A psychologist named Dan Simon did this famous experiment, which he called Gorillas in Our Midst. And some of you know about it, but I'm going to go over it because it's such a fun experiment to talk about, because it's so ridiculous and so illuminating, and because it's so relevant to what I want to continue talking to you about. So here's the deal. You go into Dan Simon's lab. He was at Harvard 20 years ago when he did this, and he was interested in this phenomena called change blindness. You see those kids' books sometimes where there's picture 1 and picture 2, and you're supposed to look at picture 1 and then look at picture 2 and see what's changed. It's actually hard. You look at picture 1, you say, well, I saw that. And then you look at picture 2, and it's different, but you can't see the differences, and you have to really compare back and forth before you can check out the differences. And that's what perception is like, is you're very blind to change, way more than you think. And way more than anybody thought before Simon did his experiments. And so he did this crazy experiment. So here's the setup. Video camera set up in front of a elevator bank, right? And so the camera would be here, the elevator bank would be about here, so it's pretty close-up shot. There's 6 people participating, 3 of them dressed in black, 3 of them dressed in white. The white team has a basketball, the black team has a basketball. They fill the whole screen, so it's not like they're way over in the corner this high and you can barely see them. They fill up the whole screen. You can detect their facial figures. It's close shot. You see their whole body, but it's clear. There's no tricks in it. And you sit there and you're the experimental subject, and the psychologist or his assistant says, okay, here's your task. And you're there to be focused on a task, apparently, because you're in a university and you're in a lab and you'd expect to be focused on a task. And so you're already primed for that, and you're willing to go along with it to be obedient. But to be a good sport, let's say, that's better than obedient. And you want to do a good job because it's intimidating to be in a lab like that. And so you want to you want to do a good job of whatever you're supposed to do. Unless you're a troublemaker, and you're probably not, because you wouldn't go into the lab to begin with if you were a troublemaker. So Simon says, count the number of times, like the white team is going to throw a basketball back and forth, variety of ways, for 3 minutes. Just count how many times they manage it, and they're going to bounce it and throw it directly and all that. And so the black team and the white team start to mill around on the video, and they're tossing the basketball back and forth, and you're watching the basketball very intently with the central part of your vision. Now, the central part of your vision is very high resolution, and you can tell this. It's pretty easy. I'll show you. I don't know. Now, this probably won't work because I think the theater is too big to do it. But we could try it, I guess. So look at my finger. All right, but pay attention to my face. Now, that's hard, because usually when you pay attention to something, you look right at it. But I don't want you to do that. I want you to pay attention to my finger and look at my face. And what should happen, except perhaps for those of you who are quite a distance at the back, is that you'll notice that you actually can't see my facial features. So, for example, if I look at even somebody in the third row, if I look directly at you, I can see your facial features fine. I can tell you have glasses. I can't tell if you're male or female. I can't distinguish you from the chair, and it has nothing to do with you. Right. But you don't have to move very far away from central vision before it becomes extremely low resolution. And so that's how your visual system is set up. High resolution in the middle, low resolution as you move towards the periphery, until like out here, I actually can't tell how many, I know how many fingers I have. Well, 5 if you include the thumb, but I can't see them. If I move them, I can see them better. Because that's one of the ways your visual system overcomes its limitations, is that it's better at seeing movement than things that are stable. And that's because, well, if you're watching something and something suddenly moves, off to the right, it might be a good idea for you to shift your attention just to see what it is. And so that's a trick your visual system uses. But mostly it's foveal vision, and it's a very, very small part of your visual field, and it's extremely heavily neurologically innervated in the visual cortex. A lot of cells are devoted to that tiny area in the middle of your vision to make it as high resolution as possible. And it might be nice. Eagles have 2 fovea, by the way. They can see better than human beings. Their eyes, bald eagles, their eyes are as big as human beings, and they can see better than we can. They're the only animals that can do that. They have 2 fovea. But you can't have that high resolution vision across the entire span of your eyes, because then your head would have to be this big to carry that much brain around, and obviously that would be hideous and also counterproductive. So we do the best we can, and what it means is that we're blind to a lot of things that we don't think we're blind to. So anyways, so you're playing Dan Simon's game, and you're counting the number of times that the basketball is tossed back and forth between the white team, and he says how many times, and you say, being a good experimental participant, you say 16. And you're right, and he says you're right, and you think, oh, good, I'm smart enough to participate in a psychological experiment. And you feel good about yourself, It's a little self-respect boost, let's say, because you passed the test. And then Simon says, did you see anything out of the ordinary? And you say, most of you, some people notice, most of you say, no. What do you mean? And Simon says, well, the gorilla. Did you see the gorilla? And you think, well, what do you mean, did I see the gorilla? Like, there was no damn gorilla. I'd see a gorilla, right? If we're watching me on stage and a gorilla came out here, you'd see it. Maybe, as it turns out. It might depend on what the gorilla was doing. But in any case, so Simon rewinds the tape as you watch it, so that there's no tricks, and he says, don't count the balls this time, just watch. So it's a different command, right? So you have a different aim now. You're pursuing a different value structure. He says, just watch. And he rewinds it, and sure enough, you see the gorilla coming out backwards and being in the middle, and then going off to the side. And then he replays it for you. And minute and a half into the 3-minute video, in waltzes this damn gorilla. It's a guy, because they didn't have a gorilla for obvious reasons. Ethics committees wouldn't allow them to use a real gorilla. And he's a big guy. He's not a small chimpanzee-type ape. He's 6'4", and he saunters out there and beats his chest like for 4 seconds, right in the middle of the screen, which you might think you'd see since it's right in the middle of the screen, and then he saunters off to the side, and you don't see it. And the question is, well, what the hell's wrong with you? Like, why don't you see it? And it's worse than that. Like, Simon has done other funny tricks. Like, imagine you went to a grocery store and the cashier was behind the counter, right? And you're talking to the cashier, and the cashier says, "Excuse me for a minute," and then kneels down, and then someone else stands up and keeps talking to you. And you think, oh, you're going to catch that. And you don't. About 50% of people miss that completely. So you can like change the person completely. And the reason is, well, how much processing do you have to do to have a casual interaction with a cashier at a grocery store? And the answer is, not much, right? You don't have to do the processing doesn't have to be that deep. And you can kind of tell this because you can watch The Simpsons, or you can watch South Park, and South Park has like the world's worst animation, right? I mean, everything moves like this. It's all circles and triangles, and you don't care. It's like 5 minutes into the narrative. It doesn't matter that it's circles and triangles having a conversation. It's fine. The icon will work. And that's a good rule for perception, is you use the simplest possible perceptual scheme that you can manage to get yourself from point A to point B, right? It's a map. You don't see the world. You see an iconic representation of the world. And then the question is, what makes the iconic representation sufficient? And I suppose sufficient means a couple of things. One thing it means is tolerable, right? It doesn't cause an excess of suffering and degeneration. It has to be functional, right? And then maybe a more specific example of that would be, well, it has to work, like a map works. A map is a low-resolution representation, but it's a good enough map if you use the map and you start at point A and you happen to be at point A, which is a good beginning for a map, and then you use the map and you get to point B and you think, good enough map. And that's really, that's us. That's how we think. That's how we construe the world. Our maps are really, the stories that we use in the world are really the maps we use to guide us. And they have perceptual implications. But that's essentially what you do. So now the question is, all right, what happened in the gorilla video? Well, what happened was you were aiming at something, right? You're aiming at counting the passes. And the question is, well, why were you doing that? And the answer is, well, someone told you to, asked you to. And then you might ask, well, why did you listen to them? There's lots of other things you might have done in the lab, but that isn't what you did. You did what you were asked to. And we might say, well, that's because you're reasonably cooperative and civilized. And then we might say, well, why is that a hallmark of cooperation and civilization? And we might say, well, reciprocity, like spontaneous reciprocity between strangers who have a bit of a contractual arrangement is part of civilized behavior, and so that's the appropriate thing to do. And we might say, well, you wanted to do a good job in the lab because you wanted to make sure that your status wasn't too low. You know, you could count to 16, and so you can give yourself a pat on the back of the head for that. And, you know, it's part of being a civilized person. And so there's a huge value structure behind that. Like, you didn't go into the lab and shoot it up, you know? You didn't bring a hand grenade, right? And you didn't sexually assault the experimenter. There's lots of things you could have done in there. And you didn't do those things. You just sat there and counted the balls and missed the gorilla. Okay, so, and there's complicated reasons for that. There are deep reasons for that. And so there are deep reasons for how you perceive things and why.
What's the relationship between the unconscious and the imagination?
It's a very good question.
That was a good question.
The dream is how the implicit structure of your perception and value hierarchy reveals itself to you. Now, I'll have to unpack that, but so the dream, the implicit structure that guides your attentional focus and
constitutes the structure of your value hierarchy reveals itself to you in the dream. So let's unpack that. It took me really like 40 years to figure this out, so it's hard to unpack. It's very hard to unpack. What the hell are you up to? And the answer is, you don't know. Why? Because you're really, really complicated. And yet you can see the world, which is a very difficult thing to do because there are a lot of ways to see the world. There's an infinite number of ways to see the world. And the fact that you can see it one particular way is nothing short of a miracle, and you certainly don't know how you do it. As far as you're concerned, you just look at the world and there it is. And there's a lot going on to make that happen. I mean, half your brain is devoted specifically to visual processing, and the other half is integrally involved. So for example, when you do something like look at a bottle, you know, you think, you see bottle, you think bottle, you evaluate bottle, you pick up bottle. You know, that's the order of perception to action. Sensation, perception, emotion, action. Or sensation, perception, emotion, thought, action. That's how we think we think. That's just not true at all. When you see a bottle, the motor grip you would use to pick it up is automatically primed by the perception. So even your motor cortex that governs your actions participates in the shaping of your perception. Almost everything you see in the world is a usable object or a pathway or an obstacle. You don't see things, because there's an infinite number of things. You don't see things and then overlay a value structure on that. The value structure is implicit in the perceptions. The value structure is implicit in the perceptions. And then the people who've made much of implicit bias sort of know that, although they're not smart enough to think through what they accidentally discovered. And so that's a big problem in our society at the moment, because you can be accused, for example, of unconsciously viewing the world through an oppressive, racist hierarchy of presumptions. You know, and there's a bit of truth to that, because you're probably a little more racist and sexist and, I don't know. How many flaws don't you have? Like 0. You've got all the flaws to some degree. And so, you know, we're all of us are ethnocentric. All of us prefer our kin, even though we might not like even them. And, you know, you've had Christmas with your family. And you know who's most likely to murder you? In case you want to know. A drunk relative. Particularly if you're drunk, so remember that next Christmas. So, you know, we see the world through an a priori structure of value. And we don't know what that is. And we dream it. We dream about it. And then we aggregate those dreams into stories. You know, that's what a novelist does. A novelist uses imagination. Let's say no novelist worth his salt knows what the hell's going to happen when he starts writing the book. How dull would that be? The writers keep writing because they want to know what happens next. You know, and if they really want to know, so will you when you read it. And they're using their imagination, or it's using them. That's a perfectly reasonable way of thinking about it. That's what would you call it? Divine inspiration, guided by the soul of divine inspiration. That's a real thing. It's the most real thing, in fact. There's not a lot of difference between imagination and dreaming, and that's useful to know. Dreaming or imagination is a bit more systematized. It's generally directed more towards a goal, but Carl Jung thought we were dreaming all the time. That we literally see the world through a dream, but that the sensations of the outside world blind us to the dream that's occurring while we're awake. I think there's every reason to assume that that's correct. One of his questions, this is a great question, what dream are you living out? Or here's another way of looking at it, what dream is possessing you?
or what story is possessing you, or what spirit is possessing you. Those are all the same questions. And you might say, well, it's me, nothing's possessing me. All that means is you just don't know what you're talking about. That's what it means. Even if you're a hedonist, you know, an impulsive hedonist, the dream that's possessing you is the dream of pain and cost-free instantaneous gratification. And if that's not a dream, man, that's a delusion. That's how dreamlike that is. It's no one with any sense at all who thinks for more than a second, and so you don't if you're an impulsive hedonist. No one who thinks for a second ever thinks that's going to work. You know, you might think you can get away with it. You might dream you can get away with it. Something's operating in your imagination. You can use your imagination like you would use a dream. That's extremely useful. That's what you do if you meditate or if you pray, and those are the same thing. So I can give you an example of this. It's very useful to learn. So I have this program online called Future Authoring, and it helps people develop a vision for the future. And you need a vision because the people perish without a vision. A vision gives you, it identifies the tools and the obstacles, and it gives you a pathway forward. It stops your anxiety and gives you hope. No vision, you're hopeless, fragmented, disunited, and anxious. You have to have a vision. It has to be a guiding vision. It has to be a uniting guiding vision. And you might say, well, how do I develop a vision like that? And here's how. Try this. If students do this for 90 minutes, it decreases the chance they'll drop out of university by 50%. So that's how well this works. That's quite something. Okay, so here's the game. So it's not an easy game, but you can do it badly and it'll still work. So that's a good game. So the first part of the game is give yourself the benefit of the doubt for the purposes of the game. Imagine that the universe would not grind cataclysmically to a halt if something as horrible and wretched as you had an okay time. So it's hard for people to grasp that because, you know, you might think of people as selfish and self-centered and out for themselves, all of that. Most people aren't like that. There's about 4% of people who are like that, and like look the hell out for them. And they're online trolls, by and large. And the clinical evidence for that's very clear, by the way. And it's pretty much them and not you if you're in interaction with them. It's all about them. But most people are the opposite of that. Most people are better to other people than they are to themselves. You know, most people are harder on themselves than they are on anyone else. And, you know, there's something admirable about that because it means to some degree that you're looking out for other people. But there's something that's not admirable about it because it means that you're not treating yourself with the respect that someone with your intrinsic worth must have to flourish. And so, and the problem is, of course, you know more than anyone else what the full range of inadequacies, what your full range of inadequacies most precisely is. You also know all the stupid things you've ever done. And that's a heavy burden, and it's hard to look at yourself, knowing what you know about yourself, and then think that you deserve anything other than suffering for your sins. And so it's really hard for people to treat themselves like they would. This is something else I learned from Carl Jung. You know, there's this biblical injunction to love your neighbor as if he were yourself. But that sort of presumes you love yourself. Most people are better at loving their neighbors. But it's actually an equation, that rule. It's like, so the first part of the equation is, you should act out the proposition that it's incumbent upon you to strive to put your life together so the best possible thing could happen to you. You should strive to take care of yourself as if you're taking care of someone you love. That's hard because you know you're trouble. So that's the first part of the game, is you have to play. It's like, okay, let's admit for a second that it wouldn't be the end of the world if I wasn't being roasted over a slow fire all the time for my iniquities. I'll give myself a break, okay? Now, so that's the first. That's hard. You got to think that through. You know, you got to open yourself up to the possibility that the earth wouldn't crack open and swallow you up if you dared to imagine that things maybe could go okay for you if you did the right thing. And then the next thing you do is you got to ask yourself a question. Ask yourself, whatever that means. It's like, how can you ask yourself and get the answer if you don't know the answer? And why do you have to ask the question if you could come up with the answer? So you're not really asking yourself, whatever that means. I don't even know what that means. I thought it up. Well, how? Well, how do you think things up? You don't know. Thoughts just appear in the theater of your imagination. They just spring out of the void. And there they are. You might think, well, I thought that up. It's like, okay, have it your way, but it's not an explanation. It's a theory. It's a dream that it's you. So imagine you ask yourself a question. Now, the first thing you're doing is admitting that there's something you don't know. So that's humility. There's something I don't know that I need to know, that I could learn if I was willing to learn. So what don't you know? Here's the question. 5 years from now, you could have what you need and want, but you have to specify what it is. Now, you don't have to specify it perfectly, because as you move towards it, you can improve. You know, you're going to learn along the way, but you got to be aiming in the right direction, vaguely. And then you have to move in that direction to learn what you need to learn as you move in that direction. So then you think, and you have to ask yourself this, and then you have to imagine. It's like, okay, I get to have what I want and need. What would that look like? And maybe you're just stumped then, you know, because it's such a big question. And you've never really asked yourself that. And no one else has ever really asked you that either. And so you don't even know where to begin, because you're that lost in the desert. That's a good way of thinking about it. So in this online program, this future authoring program, we break it down into 7 questions for people. My clients used to come to me, my students too, and say, well, I don't really know what to do. What should I do? And my answer was, I don't know what the hell you should do. It's like, you're you. I'm not here to affirm your identity or to deny it. I'm here to help you figure out the pathway forward. But if you don't know what to do, well, here's some guidelines. Don't just do nothing, because you can't. If you do nothing, you just get old, and that's something. So there's no doing nothing. So you should do something. What? Well, why don't you do what other people do if you don't know what to do? You start with that. So what other people do? Where do people find meaning in their lives? Well, here's a bunch of different domains. Most people want an intimate relationship. And if you don't, well, you got to ask yourself, what the hell's going on? You know, are you bitter, resentful, cynical, terrified, betrayed, hurt, traumatized? Or you might be a misanthrope, and you're one of those people who's extremely introverted. Maybe you're extremely introverted and creative, and you just want to go the hell out in the woods and not see anyone and do your creative thing. And it's like, okay, you're 1 in a million. You get a pass. But for most people, that's just complete bloody rubbish. And so people want to have an intimate relationship. Okay, so you admit that, and then you think, well, if I could have that relationship and it was the one I wanted, what would it look like? You know, and that can get very detailed. How would your family conduct itself if you were sitting around the dinner table? You know, it's like a Norman Rockwell painting, you know, that famous painting of Thanksgiving. It's like if you could have, or maybe you're just having an intimate candlelight dinner with your wife or your husband, and you get to have it, and it works. Well, what does it look like? Who are you? How are you dressed? How are you conducting yourself? What are you talking about? Who could you be if you could have what you wanted? Well, you can imagine, and your imagination will provide you with an answer. And then you can write that down and think, well, that looks like that'd be a good deal. That'd be worth making a sacrifice for. And then you say, well, what else do people need? Well, family. Well, that might mean children. It might mean repairing the relationship with the children you already have. Might mean your parents, if you're fortunate enough to still have them, or unlucky enough, depending on the parents. And maybe you should fix that relationship, you know? And how do you fix it? Well, you try to find out what you can be grateful about that your parents delivered to you. And then everything left over, you see if you can work it out with them. And then you think, well, if I had a relationship with my father that I would want to have, what would that look like? And then there you go. You got some work to do right there. You know, Tammy did that, I don't know, 10 years ago?
10, 15 years ago.
Well, so what do you do with your family? What was your vision?
I wanted to improve my relationship with my father.
How'd that go?
As soon as I laid it down and wrote it out, it was right there in front of me, and it just happened.
Is your dad like you?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, even though he's old and he's not there all the time now.
No, he's old, and he FaceTimed me the other day. My sister FaceTimed me, and I answered. She said, Dad wants to know when you're coming to visit. I said, well, I'm coming to visit on his birthday. So my sister said, do you want anything else, Dad? Nope, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's good.
He's thrilled to see you.
Yeah, it's
And he
good.
trusts you. And that wasn't always the case.
Well, it was more, I didn't trust him.
That too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. And your sisters?
They're good. I don't say anything to them, I just listen. It works really well.
Yeah. Right, because you used to fight when you talked.
Well, I'd say what I thought. That never went very well.
Right. So you just shut up.
Yeah.
Then they started talking to you.
Then one of them told me that I'd never done anything myself, that my parents had given me everything, that I'd been spoiled and didn't go out on my own. And I just let her talk. And I thought, I don't know who she's talking to, but let her talk. And at the end of that, she said, you know, Tam, you're a really good mum. I said, thanks, Barb.
And then she got along with you for about like 2 years.
Yeah.
And then she did it again once.
But
less so.
Yeah.
And, you know, she laid out this whole story about who Tammy was that was so preposterous that it wasn't even insulting because it had, like, nothing to do with Tammy as far as we could tell. And it was so interesting watching her do that because you could see that as she said it, she'd conjured up this story when she was, like, 14, and this is, like 30 years later, never really revisited it. And when she told the story, it was even obvious to her that, no. You know, and the next time too, you know, she came out with this litany of criticisms of you, and you just shut up and you didn't say anything or get irritated, and at the end she complimented you.
The same
right
way.
Again. Same
You're
way.
a good mother. Yeah, I know.
It was so amazing.
Yeah.
It was a good thing too, because after that, Tammy's sister got very ill, and you know, she's mostly gone now, and
Yeah.
if she hadn't got that put together when she did, it would have never happened. And that's one thing you don't want to have be the case with the people you love.
She came on tour with us even.
She did,
For a little while.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had some good time with her.
So, you know, you could put your family relationships together, and of course, the more cataclysmic they are, the harder that's going to be. But boy, if you can put together a really fractured familial relationship, you've really got your act together. So it's a big challenge, but once you solve that problem, a lot of other problems look much easier than they did before. So, and then probably you want to have some friends, you know, and hopefully ones that like you, and then so you kind of got to think through what that means. What friends do you want to have? No, people never ask themselves that question. They sort of take random friends, and I'm not saying that you should be arrogant and picky, but you should have something like a philosophy of friendship. And here's a good start. Pick people that you can tell good news to. Okay? And pick people that you can tell bad news to. You know, and if you can tell them good news, then something good happened to you, and they're celebrating the fact that something good happened to you. And maybe you'll be able to return the favor, and that's part of what friendship is. And so that's a good thing, because they're not going to be jealous and bitter and spiteful and resentful and try to drag you into the cooking pot with them just because you've managed to clamber out, you know. And then on the bad news front, well, you tell someone bad news, and it's time for them to shut the hell up and not tell you about how something happened to them 5 years ago that was even worse, and they offer you a certain amount of comfort, or at least
At least they listen, which isn't nothing, that's for sure. And then you can return that favor at some point in the future as well. And isn't that a good deal, you know? And so you want to have some friends, you want to figure out how often you want to see them and how you want to treat them and what maybe needs to be straightened out on the friendship front, you know? And then, well, you're going to have a job or a career, and you might want to figure out how you'd like that to go, you know? I've had lots of people come up to me. This is something I love doing with my clients. You know, I meet people after the shows, and people say, I had a pretty wretched job 3 years ago. Of course, I was drinking and doing all sorts of stupid things at the same time, and I was pretty bitter, but I decided I was going to, you know, give it a shot for a while, and now I make 3 times the money, and, you know, I have a job. I don't have a job, I have a career, and the horizon is kind of unlimited. And then we have a little joke, which is, well, that seems to be better. You know, is that better? It's like, yeah, that's better. It's like, hey, man, there's a huge industrial organizational literature that shows that if you write down your goals for your life, so that's the vision of your life, there's nothing you can do that will make you more productive than doing that. Well, why? Well, you're working. Do you have a reason? And if the answer is no, well, you're not going to work very hard, are you? Because why would you toil away for no reward? And then you think, well, what's your reward? Well, what's the reward you want? How about you get to have the life you want? There's a good reward. Well, what is that? Well, I don't know. It's like, well, I'm not hiring you. You know, you're all over the place, and any obstacle will stop you. And you have no hope, because you actually experience hope in relationship to a goal. That's what hope is for. It's to show you that you're progressing towards a goal. No goal, no hope. The highest goal, hey, the most hope, that'd be a good deal. You know, like you shouldn't aim so high that you got no chance of hitting it, because that's just arrogance. But like you do with a child, you say, well, here you are. You could easily hit that. It'd take a little work to hit that. Why don't you try hitting that? You know, maybe you got a 70% chance at it. 100%, that's too much. You already did that. 0? No, that's just futile. 70% or 55%, you know, depending on how tough a game you want to play. Well, that's optimally challenging too, and it's optimally challenging because it moves you towards the goal, and it transforms you while you move. So that's a good deal. So intimate relationship, family, friends, job, education plan. You're probably interested in something. Find out what it is. Get good at it. You know, maybe it's you want to figure out how to wire your house. That's a good one. You want to know how to repair the plumbing. You don't want to know how to fix, what do you call that? Regrout bricks. It's not grout, mortar. What do they call that when you fix the brick?
Tuck pointing.
What? Tuck pointing. She's done a lot of renovations, by the way. So, or maybe you could be a better carpenter, or you have abstract interests you want to read, or you got artistic interests, or, you know, get better at something. Get good at something. Get really good at something. Then you learn how to get good at something. Then you can get good at some other things. That's a good deal. Consider the space of temptation in front of you. You know, what are you doing stupid on the alcohol, drug, and promiscuity front that's screwing you up? You know, and maybe that's quite a good time and you don't want to give it up, but if you had something better to do, maybe do that instead. That's the best way out of alcoholism, for example. Hardly anybody gets out of alcoholism without something approximating a religious transformation. That's been known even by extremely secular researchers for like 60 years. There's almost no alcohol treatment programs work. In fact, I don't think there's evidence that any of them work. They can get you through withdrawal, but almost everybody relapses. But what works? Well, lots of people quit on their own, but if you investigate that, it's because they have something like a spiritual transformation. And if you investigate that, you find out that they found something better to do. And so, and in that, you know, it's a crucial point, because especially if alcohol, for example, is a good drug for you, it relieves anxiety, it improves positive emotion, it makes people more social, and it decreases self-consciousness, so you can do impulsive, hedonic, foolish things and enjoy them in the moment. That's a pretty damn good deal, except that there's tomorrow. And so why give that up? Especially if you have nothing. And the answer is, well, you won't give it up if you have nothing. But if you have something better to do, you might think, I'd rather do that. You know? I mean, I like to drink. I drank a lot when I was a kid. I started drinking when I was like 13. I used to sit with my delinquent friends behind the fence in Fairview, Alberta, 800 miles north of the American border, 20 bloody below when it was warm in the winter. And you could still go outside at minus 20. It was minus 40, things got chilly. And we'd drink, you know, vodka we'd put in the freezer and have a perfectly fine old time. And there was plenty of drinking up north, that's for sure. And I really liked it. I was very frequently the last person at the party. And why'd I quit? Well, I got married, and that was better. And I was writing this extremely difficult book, my first book, Maps of Meaning, and I just couldn't write that and do the research I was doing as a graduate school student. I couldn't do that and be hungover. It was one or the other. You know, and it was interfering with my relationship with Tammy too. Not tremendously, but I could see that it could easily be a problem. And there was no damn way I was going to be drunk with kids. Like, no. So I just stopped. And, you know, that was a really good idea. But I wouldn't have stopped if I didn't have anything better to do. Like, why would I stop? It was a blast. I had a riot, you know. So Dionysius, man, see, if you don't have another god, he's plenty of fun around the campfire, you know, at 3 in the morning. So, well, here's another thing you could consider. You know, what responsibility have you adopted on the civic front? You know, do you belong to a community of any sort? And if you don't, you're probably lonesome. And, you know, a sports club, a businessman's club, a chess club, a reading group, those are pretty local. A neighborhood association, a political party. You know, you wonder, how can those politicians be so, you can list the adjectives, you know, after that. And the answer is, because the people who aren't like that aren't doing that. And maybe you're one of them, you know, if you're so smart, why the hell aren't you shouldering your civic burden? You know, and you think, well, I'm cynical of politics, you know, I haven't got time for that. It's like, fair enough, but you're going to take what you can get then, aren't you? And then also you have zero, in this country, you have zero grounds for being cynical. And why do I say that? Well, first of all, there isn't a better country, as far as I can tell. And, you know, and that's damning with faint praise, because I'm comparing you to other actual countries instead of who you could be. But as far as when you stack your countries up, you're at the top of a dismal pile. And so, so this is about as good as it gets. And then you have these political parties, and, you know, the less said about them, the better, you could say. But I know perfectly well, this is 100% true, that both political parties at every single level are dying for competent people. It's certainly the case that the Biden administration did not have enough competent people to fill the roles it had to fill. And that's not just a casual criticism. I know this. I've talked to people who tried to staff the positions. They know perfectly well that many of the people who are filling the positions aren't the people for the positions. So why are they there? It's like, well, they took what they had. So, and I'll tell you something else about being involved in a political party, and I know this to be true as well. If you join one and you work, if you're reliable and careful and, you know, willing to start at the entry place, you'll move so quick that it will traumatize you. Because you'll think, oh my God, you're kidding. I can move that far up that quickly, knowing how little I know? It's like, yeah. So you might want to think about that. You know, here's a rule. I didn't write this in my book. All abdicated responsibility is vacuumed up by tyrants and used against you. Right, so if you're not involved politically, then you're at the whim of those who are. And that's that.
You know, let's say I was dealing with a client, and maybe that was somebody who, say a man, 35 years old, he still lived at home. So he was too dependent. His room is a complete bloody catastrophe. And, you know, he's living like a bratty 13-year-old, and that gets pretty ugly by the time you're 35. You know, and he knew it, and I'm sure his mother knew it, although obviously she put up with it, which was probably her mistake, at least in part. But maybe we decide, well, you know, let's start by cleaning your room. And so as a cognitive behavioral psychologist, you engage in a process called collaborative empiricism. And that's partly to solve the problem that you described is, well, how do we know we set the right goal? Well, we say, well, go try it. And just watch yourself like you don't know who you are, and come back next week and we'll see how you did. And maybe, I remember this one client, he came back and he said, you know, I went and got the vacuum cleaner from the closet, which is something I really never done, and I put that vacuum cleaner in the doorway of my bedroom, crossways, so it blocked the doorway, and then I just walked over it for a whole week. And look, he was completely nonplussed at his own intransigence, and look what he did, eh? He was so resentful and so angry that he, instead of vacuuming his damn bedroom like he planned, he just stuck the vacuum in his own way and then martyred himself over it every day for a week. It's like, okay then, we're starting to get somewhere with the whole you living at home thing here. And so, well, that was too high a goal for him. And you say, well, how do you know that? It's like, well, he didn't do it, did he? So then what you do practically is you say, well, how about you bring that vacuum cleaner into your room this week, and that's your whole assignment. And just watch what happens when you bring it in. Watch the fantasies that flicker in the back of your mind as you live out your resentment at your therapist, daring to make you bring that vacuum across the threshold of your bedroom. And so if people catch those fantasies, whew, that's quite the bloody night and quite the revelation to themselves, I can tell you, because you have to be one angry person to put a vacuum cleaner in your doorway and walk over it every day for a week. And so then we get somewhere. It's like, okay, now we're getting to the bottom of things, you know. But maybe the next week he'd come back, well, with the fantasies at hand and rather shocked as a consequence, but the vacuum cleaner was then in his room. And so he broke the threshold there, you know, and then maybe we'd have to, maybe all he could do was sort out a drawer or half a drawer, something like that. So what you do is, you know, you pick a target that you think is probably reasonable, and you can negotiate that with yourself.
So vision. Well, how do you develop a vision? Well, you might want to think about how would you like your life to be? So we could make this practical. We say, this is how you bring heaven down to earth. That's to make the abstract practical. And that's always very useful. That's the differentiation of Jacob's ladder, by the way. That's the axis mundi, the central point of the world. It's like, well, what do you want? Well, let's throw, you could ask yourself that. If you could have what you wanted, what would that be? So we could throw out some possibilities. People trust you. People respect you. And you deserve the trust and the respect. It's not false. People can rely on you. You're good for yourself and you're good for other people. There's productive, generous peace reigns around you. And you can do that in a playful manner. Now, that's not so bad. You could have that, let's say. And if you can think of something better, well, pursue that. But that's a good start. So that's very abstract. And so now you have to think, well, how might you conduct yourself in order for that to occur? Now, one way of approaching that is to differentiate it. You might say, well, what's the purpose of my life? It's a pretty abstract question. You're going to get a pretty general answer. Now, I could say, well, it's to expose, to be willing to adopt this spirit of challenge in relationship to life's vicissitudes. But it's still pretty abstract. So, well, yeah, but how do I go about doing that? Well, you have to differentiate it. That's the bringing of the divine message down into the realm of practical applicability. How do you make that principle real in your own life? Well, here's one way of doing it. Where do people find the significance in their life? So you could envision participating in this process. Well, what do people generally need and want? Well, here we can make a list. So this is, imagine we're taking that general principle. That's the golden cap of the pyramid. That's even the eye above the pyramid. That's another way of thinking about it. It's this superordinate principle, uniting monotheistic principle in some real sense. Now we have to differentiate it. Well, most people would like an intimate relationship. Okay, and so what does that mean? Well, intimate means physically intimate, but it likely means emotionally intimate, and it probably means iterating across some reasonable period of time, unless you just want everyone around from whom you're deriving physical gratification to be the whim of the moment, in which case you're basically a psychopath, and I wouldn't recommend that as a pathway forward. You're a narcissistic psychopath, and you might think, well, I get what I want. It's like, well, no, you won't, because your life will degenerate. So that's a bad theory. So you want an intimate relationship, and then you're going to have to treat that other person, well, how? Well, you can win an argument with your wife today, but then tomorrow, there she is in all her defeated glory. And so I don't know what the victory is going to win you. Maybe you want to negotiate towards something like productive and generous peace with her instead. And that's all part of this intimate relationship. And then it becomes truly intimate. And then it's stable across time. And that might be desirable. Then you have a platform, let's say, that will help you stabilize your entire life, because part of the reason you're going to do things is because you want to be of service to at least one other person, and vice versa. Because if it's just for yourself, that's pretty damn dismal and immature and pointless and futile. And it doesn't work anyways. So you've got at least someone else you can serve in this mutually sustaining manner. So most people want an intimate relationship. You know, and they'll settle for second-rate derivations thereof, but still what they want. Fine. Probably want something approximating a family, and even if you're not going to have kids, and I think that's a very bad idea, by the way, not to have kids. Well, you have your parents and your siblings, and if you don't have them, you have your extended family. You might want to stabilize and fortify your relationships with them, because why not? No, why not make peace with your father and your mother and your siblings if you can, and then you get to practice making peace, and then you have a family. That seems okay. And then you probably want some friends. So you could have a vision for your friendships. And what sort of people do you want around you? Well, I can tell you at a minimum, you want people you can tell bad news to, who are on your side during the times of bad news, who don't engage in competitive martyrdom with you. And you want people you can tell good news to, because they'll celebrate what you have to celebrate. And then you can do that mutually. And you want people to exchange your thoughts with, and you want people to play with. And you probably want that to iterate across time, because then you get to know each other and you can foster each other's development in a more profound manner then. And so you're going to be pretty miserable and not very sane without friends. So probably some friends aren't a bad idea. How about a job or a career? Well, why? Because the fundamental state of human being is one of deprivation, and you have to work to address that. So you have to work. And it could be a job, which is something you have to do because you're paid, but hopefully there's some vocational element to that you can find some deep intrinsic meaning in your work. And you can certainly do that if you're working with your hands. You can find a sustaining meaning in the responsibility you take in relationship to your job and your career. And then I would say also, if you're good at it, so you're skilled at what you do, plus you're a good team player, I don't care where you're working, it could become a real center of the world for you. You know, when I was a kid, 14, 15, 16, I worked in restaurants for years, and I really liked that. And that's a very complicated thing to do, to work in a restaurant. I was just a dishwasher and then a cook. As I moved up the ladder, let's say, and I learned to cook and I learned to clean, and I learned to be hospitable, and I learned to work in a complex, dynamic environment, because a restaurant is exactly that. And, I got along with the people I worked with, and I came to work on time, and I did my bloody job, and I tried to do it right. And so most of the people who were my superiors, so to speak, were happy with me. They wanted me to be there, and I wanted to be there. It was still a pain when I was a kid sometimes to have to go to work when my friends were out, drinking beer at the local river. And I might have wanted to do that instead. But fundamentally, immersing myself in that environment was positive in every sort of way and made me more responsible and mature. And I enjoyed it a lot. Many of the best memories I have from my adolescence in particular are the times I spent working in the restaurants that I worked in. And you can do that in a masterful manner. There are great restaurants where you walk in and everything's perfect. It's so hospitable. Everyone is treating everyone else extremely well. The food is of immense quality. Like, that's a paradisal place. And you can work to make that. I don't care where you're working, you can work to make that happen. You can treat the people around you right. You can treat your customers right. You can shed your bitterness and your resentment. You can take on the lowly status of your beginner job as if it's also a field of unlimited opportunity, which it is if you can get your head around it. And then that can be part of the vision of your life. And then you can think about that job or career as something that unfolds and develops across time too. And if you make a commitment where you are locally, I don't care where it is, your opportunities are just going to multiply like mad. So like if you're a short order cook at a restaurant, you have a single shift and you're a really good cook, you'll find pretty soon that the restaurant is much busier when you're cooking and that people are pretty damn happy to be there. And you'll get a reputation with your boss. If he or she has any sense and any greed of the proper sort whatsoever, they're going to recognize you. And then, maybe you move from that restaurant to a restaurant with more possibility, or at least somewhere else with more possibility. And you can do that. I don't care where you are. If you have the opportunity to have a job and you're not working with people who are entirely tyrannical and pathological, if you make the right sacrifices in that position and you have the proper vision, which isn't based on resentment. Oh, why do I have to do this stupid job? It's like, well, it's going to be a stupid job if that's the attitude you have towards it. Instead, if you try to foster all the interpersonal relationships you have in that environment, you'll find that there's an infinite amount of possibility right there in front of you, like there always is. And so, what else? Well, how about some education? You're probably not as informed as you might be, and probably something interests you. It's like, well, why don't you delve into that a bit more and make something more of yourself? Educate yourself to the limits of your intelligence and make a plan for that. And you can do that formally, or you can do it informally. You can do it by reading. There's many great books, and they're not expensive. In fact, the greater the book, the less it costs, weirdly enough. And so you can just do that. You can make a plan. I want to read a book a month, or a book every 6 months, or a book a day. I don't care. Or I want to listen to a podcast a week, or something like that. It's like, expand yourself a bit. Have a plan to be educated. What else? What should you do with your time outside of work? Well, play a good game, right? Maybe you want to do something creative. If you're high in openness, that's probably what you want to do. Maybe you want to take on some civic responsibility and duty. That's what you might do if you're conscientious. Maybe you want to care for someone if you're agreeable. Or maybe you want a new domain for your ambition if you're more disagreeable. Maybe you want to work to make your family more secure. That would be a good way of constraining your trait neuroticism. Maybe you want to expand your social engagements. You're extroverted. It's like, fine, those are good things to do with your time outside of work. They're all matched to your temperament. You can mix and match and do a bunch of those things at once. I used to talk to my students at the U of T and say, well, how much time, by your own definition, how much time do you waste a day? And the median, which is the most typical amount of time wasted, was always about 8 hours. It's like, oh, you waste half your awake time. And you wonder why things aren't going for you that well in your life. You can just do the economic calculations. Well, let's say you're worth $25 an hour, all things considered. Maybe you can't find a job that would pay you that much, but that doesn't mean your time is only worth what you could attain in a given job, because everything you do now echoes into the future. And so let's say it's $25 an hour just for the sake of mathematical computation. Well, that's $200 a day. It's $1,400 a week. It's $5,600 a month. It's basically $70,000 a year. So every year that you spend wasting 8 hours a day, you deprive yourself of the equivalent of a full-time and somewhat generous income. So that's just, and if your life isn't going very well, you might think, well, maybe it's because I like waste half of it. That there could be some relationship between those things. Then you might ask yourself, well, what would happen if I wasted none of it, like zero? And you might say, well, how difficult is life? Well, it's ultimately difficult. It's like, yeah, well, it is. So how much of it do you have to use properly in order to contend with that ultimate difficulty? And the answer might be, well, all of it. And if you're not, well, you're going to suffer, obviously, because it's difficult. And so if you're wasting time, then you're going to suffer. And so you might want to have a vision for what you do with your time. And you could ask yourself, well, if I could conceptualize and structure my free time the way I wanted to, what would that be? And then you'll have a vision. And that it's like a revelatory vision in some sense if you ask the question properly, because you can ask yourself these questions. You can ask yourself them in the micro domain. Let's say you come home from work every day to your waiting wife and children, just to take a stereotyped example. It's like, well, you're doing that every day. How would you like that homecoming to go? If you could have it the way you wanted it to be, it's like, what would you like your wife, how would you like your wife to welcome you when you returned home? And then you could sit down and talk to her. It's like, I come home every day. That's every day. That's like 15 minutes of every day. That's an hour a week. It's 50 hours a year. It's 1 work week. It's 2% of my life. It's like, how do I want to be welcomed when I come home? And your wife might say, well, how do I want you to welcome me when you come home? You might think, yeah, well, maybe we could get both of those right together. And then we could be welcomed in a way that was really good for both of us. What would that look like? Well, you know, I'm tired when I get home. And she might say, well, I'm tired too, because I've been taking care of the kids all day. And he might say, well, I don't want to hear about every problem that happened at home the second I get in. And she might say, well, I don't want to hear about all your problems at work right away either. It's like, okay, but we do need to talk through the problems. It's like, yeah, that would be helpful. So, you know, when I come home, why don't I say, honey, I'm home, and why don't you come and give me a hug? And why don't we notice for a moment that we're happy to be together, which is why we got married to begin with. And we could appreciate the fact that we're together. And then maybe we could have something to eat, and we can figure out how to arrange that. And then maybe we could sit for 15 minutes and talk about what happened during the day. And that could be our routine. It's like, well, what do you think of that? Well, here's how I'd modify it. It's like, okay, let's modify it that way. Well, then we'll implement it and see how it works. And then it's like 2% of your life fixed. You do that 50 times, which isn't that many times. It's 100% of your life is fixed. And then when it's fixed, you can even make it better. And doing that 50 times is just not that much. And lots of things iterate, right? You do the same thing every day. You get those things you do every day right, man, you're on the way to having your life together. That's the ritualization of time and space in some real sense. And the application of what's essentially a religious attitude to all the elements of your life that you might otherwise regard as mundane. Oh my God, I have to do the same thing every day. It's like, hey, that's your life, man. The things you do every day. Get those things right.
Well, so you're moving from point A to point B in your little circumscribed world. You've made everything invisible. And as long as that works, then your theory's good enough. It's accurate enough. It's true enough. You're in your little paradise. But if something comes up and objects, well, that's where your character is tested fundamentally. That's the character test. It's like, what do you do with messages of error? And that's a tricky issue. Okay, so here's a solution to that. Here's what not to do. I am a bad person. I got to see myself. I'm a bad person. I might as well just go jump off the bridge. It's like, no, that's not good, because what that means is that every time you try to learn something, you're going to make a mistake, because what do you know? So you're going to make mistakes. And if the rule is every time you make a mistake, you're going to go jump off the bridge, then that's not a useful problem-solving strategy. And so when you make a mistake, you don't get to beat yourself to death with a club. It's a bad strategy, and you'll have your internal tyrant in there who's perfectly happy about doing that. That's the, you know, overactive superego that Freud talked about. Maybe it came to you via a parent who was too authoritarian, or a grandparent, or maybe it's just you because you're disagreeable and neurotic, and so you'll take your, or hyper-conscientious, you'll take yourself apart. Well, you've got a problem. Something has objected to you. Then the question is, well, what does that mean? Well, maybe you're not looking at the world right. Maybe your goals are wrong. Maybe you're not acting properly. It's okay. So the question that arises when an obstacle emerges is, which part of this structure needs attention? And the first answer can't be all of it, which is why when you're arguing with someone in an intimate relationship and you're angry at them and you want to win, which is a big mistake, you want to win, you say, well, this is what you're like. Here's another 10 examples of how you've done that in the past, and I can enumerate more of them if you'd like. And so that's actually what you're like, and I've tried fixing you and it didn't work, and so it looks like you're going to be like that up into the future, and you're basically saying to them, well, you're a bad person, and the only thing they can do is either collapse or punch you. And punching you is actually better than collapsing. You know what I mean? It's such a counterproductive way of arguing. You don't leave the person any out. And so maybe, well, they're civilized, so it doesn't get physical. Well, maybe that's good and maybe it isn't. But then they end up either really not happy with you in a way that they will manifest the first possible opportunity they get, or they have to go off in the corner and cringe. It's like, great, you won. It's like now your partner's either hates you or is cringing. It's great. That's a real good victory, man. Rack up about 100 victories like that and you'll be in divorce court and spending $250,000 while being miserable about it. Yeah. So anyway, so something objects to you and you think, okay, well, I need to take myself apart, right? Because there's a piece that's broken somewhere. And then you might think, well, let's assume it's a little piece to begin with. That's the right mechanism. It's like, okay, you got a C-. That doesn't prove that you're stupid. And now it implies that you might be stupid, but it doesn't, right, really, it does, and that's why you don't want to look at it. Maybe it implies that you're lazy, or implies that you're ignorant, or like it implies all sorts of terrible. Might imply that you're a bad person even. But you don't want to leap to that, and that's sort of the proclamation of innocence before guilt. Assume that you're the least amount of reprehensible and ignorant possible. And so then you look at the micro routines. It's okay, well, I got a C- in this course. Maybe I should study for that course 15 minutes more a day for the next 3 months. And then you ask yourself, do you think you could do that? No, I'm too useless. Okay, how about 15 minutes every second day? You think you could do that? You put it in your schedule, like 15 minutes every second day in the morning. And that's, well, you think, well, what's wrong with me? Well, I'm not very good at managing my study schedule. That's not quite down here at the behavioral level, but it's pretty close, because what you can take an action. You can open up your schedule and you can say, well, I'll mark 15 minutes aside. Then you can practice doing that. It's pretty low level in the hierarchy. It means, well, you're still not a horrible person. You just got to polish up your work ethic. And so what you want to do is it's like the old adage, you got to stand up for yourself, but you don't want to make unnecessary enemies. That's a really good thing to know. It's like, shut the hell up most of the time, but now and then you don't shut up because it's time to say something. You don't want to make unnecessary enemies, though. Well, you don't want to take yourself apart any more than is absolutely necessary. Start little, and you do that with people around you too. Like if you have a child, and the child does something that isn't right, then you think, okay, minimal necessary intervention. What can we do to decrease the probability that that's going to occur in the future? That's a good thing to know with children. It's also a good thing to know with your partners. You're having an argument with them. It's like, okay, what the hell do you want? What's the minimum thing you can request from them that would satisfy you? And the evil part of your soul is going to be, I want them cringing in a corner. It's like, yeah, get that stuff under control, man. See if you can figure out what that person could offer you that would be minimal that you would accept. And then tell them that. It's like, here's the words I would like you to say in the apology I would like you to formulate, assuming that you think you did something wrong. We have to argue about that because maybe you didn't. But if you did, I want to specify it precisely and narrowly, and I want to give you an escape route. And you might only be able to do it badly because you're still mad. So you apologize half-heartedly. It's like you get a pat on the head for that. Good. Next time it'll be 51%, not half-heartedly. Right? So it's careful training. It's careful training of yourself and other people with the goal in mind, but also with the least amount of harshness possible. And then the other thing to do as well, and this is also true for you, and this is something I learned from studying the behaviorists, is like watch the people around you like a hawk. Whenever they do something that you think is good, you tell them. That's wisdom, man. You'll get so far with that you cannot bloody well believe it, because most people, you know, they're afraid of any number of things, but one of the things they're really afraid of is that now and then they'll creep out of their cynical shell and try to do something good. You know, it's like they're popping out this thing that's unbelievably vulnerable. They'll try to do something good and creep right back into their persona, and they'll look around and see if anyone noticed, and sometimes they'll get punished for it, and then, well, then they won't do it again. So don't do that. But then now and then you think, hey, I saw you do this, that was actually pretty good, and they think, oh, wow, someone noticed, you know. It's like, wow. And then they'll think, yeah, I could do that again. And if you want to live with someone for a long period of time, I would say every time they do something that you would like them to do more of, number one, notice. Number two, tell them, right? Because I know you don't want to, because you really want to dominate them. And you don't want them thriving, because then they'd be competition to you, and you wouldn't be able to go complain to your mother about what a miserable partner you have, and you know how delightful that is. So you have to forego all that pleasure if you actually help your person develop. So you got to get over all that. It's really annoying. So, you know, you've got this person pegged as, yeah, you're stuck with them, and you know, maybe it's the best you can do, but you got one eye open. And then every time they do something good, you don't want to notice, because if that elevated them a little bit, you wouldn't be able to feel so resentful and miserable and keep your eye open for the next possible affair. And that is what people are like. That is what people are like, and that's what you're like too. That's what people are like. So you got to decide if that's what you want, or you want to help the person that you're with grow, you know. Now, it's dangerous, because they might outshine you. Well, good. Then you'll have someone to compare yourself to. That'd be a good deal. It's really rough with kids, you know, because parents will stop their children from succeeding beyond them. They get jealous, and then they'll put them down, and then they have kids that do not like them, and they'll pay for it. Okay, well, so that's another issue in some sense that seems to make the postmodernist critique even more correct. How in the world are you going to extract out a canonical interpretation of something like that? It's like it's not possible. But here's the issue, as far as I can tell. So when the postmodernists extended that critique to the world, they said, look, well, a text is complicated enough. You can't extract out a canonical interpretation. What about the world? The world's way more complicated than a text, and so there's an infinite number of ways that you can look at the world. And so how do we know that any one way is better than any other way? And that's a good question. Now, the postmodern answer was we can't. And that's not a good answer, because you drown in chaos under those circumstances, right? You can't make sense of anything. And that's not good, because it's not neutral to not make sense of things. It's very anxiety-provoking. It's very depressing, because if things are so chaotic that you can't get a handle on them, your body defaults into emergency preparation mode, and your heart rate goes up, and your immune system stops working, and like you burn yourself out. You age rapidly, because you're surrounded by nothing you can control. That's an existential crisis, right? It's anxiety-provoking and depressing, very hard on people. And even more than that, it turns out that the way that we're constructed neurophysiologically is that we don't experience any positive emotion unless we have an aim, and we can see ourselves progressing towards that aim. It isn't precisely attaining the aim that makes us happy, as you all know if you've ever attained anything, because as soon as you attain it, then the whole little game ends. Then you have to come up with another game, right? So it's Sisyphus. And that's okay, but it does show that the attainment can't be the thing that drives you, because it collapses the game. That's what happens when you graduate from university. It's like you're king of the mountain for one day, and then you're like surf at Starbucks for the next 5 years, you know? So, yeah. So what happens is that human beings are weird creatures, because we're much more activated by having an aim and moving towards it than we are by attainment. And what that means is you have to have an aim, and that means you have to have an interpretation. And it also means that the nobler the aim, that's one way of thinking about it, the better your life. And that's a really interesting thing to know, because, you know, you've heard ever since you were tiny that you should act like a good person, and you shouldn't lie, for example. And you might think, well, why the hell should I act like a good person, and why not lie? I mean, even a 3-year-old can ask that question, because smart kids learn to lie earlier, by the way. And they think, well, why not twist the fabric of reality so that it serves your specific short-term needs? I mean, that's a great question. Why not do that? Why act morally? If you can get away with something and it brings you closer to something you want, well, why not do it? These are good questions. It's not self-evident. Well, it seems to me tied in with what I just mentioned. It's like you destabilize yourself and things become chaotic. That's not good. And if you don't have a noble aim, then you have nothing but shallow, trivial pleasures, and they don't sustain you. And that's not good, because life is so difficult, it's so much suffering, it's so complex. It ends, and everyone dies, and it's painful. It's like, without a noble aim, how can you withstand any of that? You can't. You become desperate, and once you become desperate, things go from bad to worse very rapidly when you become desperate. And so there's the idea of the noble aim, and it's not something. It's something that's necessary. It's the bread that people cannot live without, right? That's not physical bread. It's the noble aim. And what is that? Well, it was encapsulated in part in the story of Marduk. It's to pay attention. It's to speak properly. It's to confront chaos. It's to make a better world. It's something like that. And that's enough of a noble aim so that you can stand up without, cringing at the very thought of your own existence, so that you can do something that's worthwhile to justify your wretched position on the planet. So now the literary issue is that, so look, you take a text, you can interpret it a variety of ways, but that's not right. This is where the postmodernists went wrong, because what you're looking for in a text, and in the world for that matter, is sufficient order and direction. So then we have to think, well, what does sufficient order and direction means? Well, you don't want to suffer so much that your life is unbearable, right? That just seems self-evident. Pain argues for itself. I think of pain as the fundamental reality, because no one disputes it, right? I mean, even if you say that you don't believe in pain, it doesn't help when you're in pain. You still believe in it, right? You can't pry it up with logic and rationality. It just stands forth as what the fundament of existence, and that's actually quite useful to know. Say, well, you don't want any more of that than is absolutely necessary. And I think that's self-evident. And then you say, well, wait a minute, it's more complicated than that. You don't want any more of that that's necessary today, but also not tomorrow, and not next week, and not next month, and not next year. So however you act now, better not compromise how you're going to be in a year, because that would just be counterproductive. That's part of the problem with short-term pleasures, right? It's like act in haste, repent at leisure. Everyone knows exactly what that means. So you have to act in a way that works now and tomorrow and next week and next month and so forth. And so you have to take your future self into account. And human beings can do that. And taking your future self into account isn't much different than taking other people into account, right? Because I remember there's this Simpson episode, and Homer downs a quart of mayonnaise and vodka. He says, Marge says, you shouldn't really do that. And Homer says, that's a problem for future Homer. I'm sure glad I'm not that guy.